She pointed at him in front of everyone. In a lobby full of executives in tailored suits, Victoria Sterling, CEO of one of the most powerful defense companies on the East Coast, looked at the man in the worn work jacket standing near her front desk and said, loud enough for her entire staff to hear, "Service entrance is around back. This isn't the place for deliveries." He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He just nodded once, turned around, and walked out. 53 minutes later, a two-star general walked past every executive in that lobby and went straight to find him. "Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels." The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to. Ethan Walker lay still for a moment, staring up at the water stain on the ceiling he'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. It had spread another inch since summer, pushing outward along the drywall like something patient and inevitable. He noticed it every morning. He never had time to deal with it. He swung his legs off the mattress, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling into the October cold. It was the kind of quiet that felt earned, the silence of a man who'd learned to move through the world without disturbing it. He stood, pulled on a gray undershirt, and padded down the hall in socks. He stopped at the second door on the left and pushed it open an inch, just enough to see. Lily was still sleeping, curled on her side with both hands tucked under her cheek, the way she'd slept since she was 3 years old. She was 6 now. Her dark hair had come loose from the braid he'd done the night before. Badly, he knew. He'd never quite mastered braids. And spread across the pillow in a tangle she'd probably complain about when she woke up. He watched her for a few seconds. Then he pulled the door back to where it was and went downstairs to make coffee. Well, the kitchen was small. A single bulb in the overhead fixture, a second-hand table with 4 chairs where they only ever used 2, a dish rack on the counter with a cereal bowl and a Spider-Man cup drying from last night. Ethan filled the coffee maker, leaned against the counter while it brewed, and looked out the window at his driveway. The truck was out there, a '98 Ford F250 with 260,000 miles on it, rebuilt engine, patched rear quarter panel, and a company logo stenciled on the doors that said Walker Automotive Restoration in plain block letters. He'd done the stenciling himself with a steady hand and a $5 brush. It wasn't pretty. It worked. 3 years ago, Walker Automotive Restoration hadn't existed. 3 years ago, Ethan was still in a temporary apartment in Fredericksburg, sorting through the pieces of a life that had come apart faster than he'd expected. The divorce finalized, the discharge processed, the custody agreement signed, and a 4-month-old who needed him to figure things out before he finished figuring them out himself. He'd figured things out. Not elegantly. Not the way people described in interviews or memoirs. He'd figured things out the way you did when the other option was failing a kid who hadn't asked for any of it. One ugly, exhausting, non-glamorous decision at a time. He'd borrowed against a small veteran's loan to lease a bay in a garage on the edge of town. He'd taken on contracts nobody else wanted. The manual work, the heavy rust, the vehicles that required more hours than the estimates justified. Because, at the beginning, he needed the hours more than the margin. He'd learned quickly that the quality of his work was the only advertisement that mattered. By the time Lily started pre-K, Walker Automotive Restoration had a second bay, 1 full-time employee, and 2 long-term contracts with fleet operators who'd stopped calling other shops. It wasn't Sterling Defense Solutions, but it was his, and it worked. He poured his coffee, black, and sat at the table with a legal pad covered in notes from the night before. The Sterling delivery was today. 2 pallets of custom-fabricated suspension components he'd rebuilt and coated himself. Specialized parts for a fleet of tactical utility vehicles that Sterling had been contracted to retrofit for a regional National Guard unit. He'd spent 11 days on those components, stripped the originals down, examined the fatigue points, rebuilt with upgraded materials, applied a thermal-resistant coating that the original spec sheet hadn't called for but that any field operator would eventually need. He'd sent a technical note along with the invoice explaining the upgrade and why he'd made the call. He didn't charge extra for it. He wasn't sure anyone had read the note. He wasn't sure it mattered. The work was the work. He flipped through the legal pad pages, his handwriting cramped and precise, the habit of a man who'd written field reports in difficult conditions, reviewing the delivery checklist, the documentation package he'd prepared, the chain of custody forms. Ethan Walker was not the kind of man who showed up somewhere unprepared. His phone buzzed on the table. A reminder. Lily. School show 6:30 p.m. Don't be late. He'd set the reminder 6 times. 3 on his phone, 1 on the paper calendar on the refrigerator, 1 on the small whiteboard by the front door, 1 on a post-it note he'd stuck to the dashboard of the truck. He would not be late. By 6:15, Lily was awake and the kitchen was chaos. Not catastrophic chaos. The manageable kind, plus some. The kind that happened when a 6-year-old was excited about wearing a particular blue dress that was currently in the laundry and couldn't understand why. "But it's my dress," Lily said, standing in the middle of the kitchen in the green dress that was an acceptable substitute, her arms crossed with the conviction of someone making an ironclad legal argument. "It is your dress," Ethan agreed, flipping a pancake. "It's also wet. Wet dresses don't work." "You could dry it." "I could," he said. "And then you'd be at school in a towel while we waited." She thought about this with a serious expression that reminded him uncomfortably of himself. Then she pulled out the chair, sat down, and accepted the pancake he slid onto her plate with the resignation of a person who had lost the argument but hadn't conceded the principle. "Is it going to be done by tonight?" she asked. "For my show?" "It will be done by tonight." "Promise?" He looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, darker than his, with that slight almond shape that caught light in an odd way. She was watching him the way she did when she was deciding whether to believe something. "Yeah," he said. "I promise." She picked up her fork. "Okay, fine." He sat across from her with his coffee and watched her eat. She did this thing when she was happy, not obviously happy, but the low-grade, comfortable kind of happy, where she'd hum to herself between bites. A song that had no melody he'd ever been able to identify. Just a sound she made when she felt safe. She was humming now. He drank his coffee and didn't say anything. At 7:40, he dropped her at school. She hugged him in the car line with the quick, efficient hug of a kid who was also maintaining her social credibility on the front steps, then grabbed her backpack and ran toward her friends without looking back. He watched until she was through the door. Then he drove to the garage. Marcus was already there. Of course he was. Marcus Green was always there before Ethan, a fact that still mildly annoyed Ethan, despite the 3 years of evidence. Marcus was 26, built like someone who'd once played defensive end and hadn't entirely given up the physique, and had come to Walker Automotive through a workforce re-entry program that Ethan had agreed to participate in as a minor favor to a county social worker he respected. Marcus had turned out to be better with his hands than anyone Ethan had hired before or since. "Sterling stuff's loaded," Marcus said without looking up from the workbench, where he was running a final torque check on a bracket. "I put the documentation folder in the cab." "What time did you get here?" 6. Ethan looked at him. "The delivery isn't until 10. "I know." Marcus shrugged one shoulder. "Wanted to do a last check on the coating. Didn't feel right about the third component. Thought I saw a thin spot near the edge weld." "Was there one?" "No, it was fine." He put the torque wrench down and turned around. "But I wanted to look." Ethan nodded. That was the right answer. He didn't say so, but Marcus had worked there long enough to read the silence. "You want me to come on the delivery?" Marcus asked. "No. Hold down the bay. Peterson's transmission job needs the primary lift today." "Got it." Marcus turned back to the workbench. "You eat?" "Had coffee." "That's not eating." Ethan picked up his jacket from the hook by the door and shrugged it on. It was a canvas work jacket, dark navy, broken in with the Walker logo on the left chest. He'd had it for 2 years and it showed. "I'll eat after," he said. "You always say that." "I always eat after." "Sometimes you eat after," Marcus said. "Sometimes you come back and it's 3 o'clock and you've had 1 coffee and a granola bar from the glove box and you act like that's normal." "It's fine," Ethan said. "It's not fine." "Marcus?" "I'm just saying." Ethan picked up the documentation folder from the cab, flipped through it once to confirm everything was in order, and put it back. "I'll eat after," he said. Marcus made a sound that was not agreement. Sterling Defense Solutions occupied a facility on the northeastern edge of the industrial corridor, a 200,000 square foot complex of steel and reinforced concrete that had been a regional aerospace parts manufacturer in a previous decade, before Victoria Sterling had acquired it and rebuilt it into something considerably more significant. Ethan had driven past it a few times over the years without much thought. From the road, it looked like most large defense facilities: imposing fence line, manicured grounds, American flags on tall poles out front, the quiet, controlled energy of a place where serious things happened in rooms you couldn't see from outside. He pulled up to the main entrance at 9:53 a.m. The parking lot was already active, more so than he'd expected for a mid-morning delivery. There were vehicles he didn't recognize: 2 black SUVs with government plates parked prominently near the entrance, a dark sedan, a handful of additional personnel vehicles. A cluster of men in business attire were visible through the lobby glass, moving with the tense purposefulness of people managing something they hadn't fully controlled yet. He checked the delivery instructions on his phone. Report to main reception for sign-in, then proceed to shipping dock for offload. He killed the engine, grabbed the documentation folder, and went in. The lobby of Sterling Defense Solutions was the kind of space designed to communicate things without saying them. High ceilings, polished concrete floors, a reception desk that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd charged a lot for it. The walls displayed framed certifications, contract seals, and a long row of photographs that moved chronologically through what appeared to be the company's history. Smaller beginnings, incremental growth, the company it had become. Behind the desk, a young woman in a headset was managing 2 phone lines simultaneously. 3 men in suits near the far window were talking in low, clipped tones, glancing occasionally at a tablet between them. Ethan walked to the reception desk and waited. The woman held up one finger without looking at him, finished a sentence into her headset, then looked up with the practiced smile of someone who fielded 100 interruptions a day. "Good morning. Here for delivery for procurement. Walker Automotive Restoration. I have a 10 o'clock. She typed something. "Walker, got it. Let me pull up your... Excuse me." The voice came from across the lobby, crisp, confident, the particular register of someone who spoke in rooms that paid attention. Ethan turned. The woman walking toward him was probably his age, maybe a year or 2 younger. Dark hair pulled back in a way that was professional without being severe. Charcoal blazer, pressed trousers, the kind of shoes that cost enough to say something without trying to. She was moving fast, the way people did when they had 17 things happening and couldn't slow down for any of them. Behind her, Ethan noticed this immediately, were 2 men in suits keeping pace. Not assistants. The body language was different. They were watching the room, not her. She stopped about 6 feet from him, her eyes doing a quick automatic assessment that she probably didn't realize she was performing. Work jacket, old truck in the lot, documentation folder from a company he'd said out loud. He watched the assessment happen. He'd seen it before. He knew exactly what conclusion she was reaching. "We have a military inspection team arriving in the next hour," she said. "The main entrance needs to be clear for their vehicles. Deliveries go around to the service entrance, Building C, around the east side of the property. The dock foreman can sign off on whatever you need." It wasn't rude exactly. It wasn't the worst version of this interaction, but it was loud enough. There were people in the lobby, the receptionist, the men near the window, 2 additional staff members who'd appeared from somewhere, that the direction was public in a way it didn't need to be. Ethan looked at her for a moment. He held up the documentation folder. "I have an appointment at 10 with your procurement office. The sign-in sheet." "I understand," she said, and the 2 words had a particular patience in them that wasn't patience at all. "But our protocols today require all non-essential personnel to use the service entrance. I'm sure you understand." Non-essential personnel. "Of course," Ethan said. He nodded once, tucked the folder under his arm, and walked back out through the main entrance. Behind him, he heard her heels click back across the polished floor. A brief exchange with the men in suits. Something about the inspection timeline. Her voice already shifted back into a different frequency. The frequency of a woman managing something large and complex and expensive. He didn't hear what she said. He was already through the door. The service entrance at Building C was on the east side of the property, accessible through a secondary gate that required him to buzz in, state his business, and wait while someone checked a manifest. The dock foreman, a heavy-set man named Phil, judging by the name patch on his shirt, came out squinting into the October sun, reviewed Ethan's paperwork, and said, "Suspension components." "Yeah, okay. Back up to Dock 4. Ethan backed the truck up to Dock 4. Two dock workers unloaded the pallets with a hand truck while Phil compared the component numbers against the purchase order on a clipboard. It was methodical, unhurried work, the kind of process that either went smoothly or didn't. It went smoothly. "These the custom ones?" Phil asked, crouching near the first pallet to look at the coating on the components. "Rebuilt from original spec plus a thermal-resistant layer on the joint surfaces," Ethan said. "There's a technical note in the documentation package explaining the variance from the original order." Phil looked up. "Who ordered the variance?" "Nobody. I added it at my discretion. Same price as quoted. I thought the field application required it." He paused. "The note explains the reasoning. Your engineering team might want to review it before the next retrofit cycle." Phil looked at him for a second, then at the component in front of him, then back at Ethan. "You do this often? Add stuff that wasn't in the order?" "When I think it's warranted. Most suppliers just deliver what's on the sheet." "Yeah," Ethan said. "Most do." Phil straightened up, flipped through the documentation, found the technical note, and scanned it. His lips moved slightly as he read. He was a careful reader. Ethan respected that. "I'll pass this to engineering," Phil said. "Appreciate it." "No charge for the upgrade?" "No charge." Phil wrote something on the clipboard. "Okay. Sign here for delivery confirmation." Ethan signed. "You want anything?" Phil said. "We've got coffee inside. Machine's not great, but it's hot." "I'm good." "Thank you." Phil nodded. "Nice work, by the way. These look solid." Ethan picked up his documentation folder. "Thank you." He walked back to the truck, sat in the cab for a moment with the window down, looking at the side of Building C. The corrugated steel walls, the loading dock lights, the oil stain on the concrete floor that had probably been there since the building was built. He thought about the lobby, the woman with the charcoal blazer, non-essential personnel. The particular way she'd said it, not cruel, but offhand, the way you spoke to someone whose feelings weren't part of the calculation. He'd been spoken to like that before. Not always, but enough times and in enough context that he recognized the specific weight of it. The way it sat in the chest for a minute, not painful exactly, but something. He started the truck. He had 20 minutes before he needed to be back on the road. He'd eat something, he decided. Marcus had been right about that at least. He pulled out his phone to find a diner. He was sitting in the parking lot of a diner 2 blocks from the facility, looking at a laminated menu through the window of the truck, when his phone rang. The number was one he hadn't seen in 8 months. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he answered. "Captain Walker." The voice was unmistakable. Steady, deliberate, with the particular texture of a man who'd spent 40 years choosing words carefully because in his world, the wrong word at the wrong time had consequences. "General Hawthorne," Ethan said. "I'm not a captain anymore." "You'll always be a captain to me, son. Where are you?" "Parking lot of a diner. I just made a delivery at Sterling Defense." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Sterling Defense Solutions? On the industrial corridor?" "Yes, sir." Another pause. "You're still in town?" "I'm always in town. I live here." "Right." Something in the general's voice shifted, not warmly, but with a specific kind of acknowledgement. "I'm going to need you to turn around." Ethan looked up from the menu. "Sir?" "I'm 10 minutes out from Sterling Defense. I'm leading the Federal Review Panel for their fleet rehabilitation contract." General Richard Hawthorne paused. "I've been through the contractor documentation. I've read the technical proposals. Most of them are adequate. A few are impressive on paper." He paused again. "I need someone in that room who knows what adequate looks like in the field, who knows the difference between a system that works in a report and a system that works when it's cold and the guy depending on it hasn't slept in 30 hours. Ethan was quiet. "Ethan," the general said, and it was rare enough, the use of his name, not his rank, that it landed differently. I'm not asking as a favor. The program matters. The contract matters. I need someone in that room who's actually turned a wrench in difficult conditions. I'm a parts supplier, General. I'm not part of the evaluation. You are now. I'm adding you to the review panel as an independent technical consultant. It's within my authority. I've already called ahead. Ethan looked at the diner window. He thought about the dock. He thought about Phil reading the technical note. He thought about the woman in the lobby directing him to the service entrance in front of her staff. He thought about Lily's show at 6:30. I need to be done by 4, he said. That's fine. And I need to call my daughter's school. Whatever you need. Ethan put the menu down on the passenger seat. I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said. He parked in the main lot this time. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off, looking at the entrance. Through the glass, he could see the lobby was now considerably more populated than it had been 40 minutes ago. Additional staff, more suits, the energy of a building on a performance footing. He had on the same jacket, the same worn boots, the same documentation folder with Walker Automotive Restoration on the tab. He got out of the truck. The woman at the reception desk looked up when he came in. She looked slightly longer than before. The specific look of someone processing a discrepancy between what they expected and what was happening. Sir, deliveries. I'm here to meet General Hawthorne. He should have called ahead. A beat. She checked something on her screen. Whatever she found there changed the expression on her face in a way she didn't fully manage to conceal. Yes? Of course. Yes. Let me... She picked up the desk phone. Let me let Ms. Sterling know. Thank you, Ethan said, and stood quietly near the desk with his folder and waited. He was still waiting, 2 minutes later, when the main entrance opened. General Richard Hawthorne walked in like a man who'd been walking into rooms his entire life without needing to announce himself. He was 61 years old, built like a telephone pole, with close-cropped silver hair and the specific posture of a career officer who considered slouching a form of moral failure. Behind him came 4 people, 2 in uniform, 2 in civilian clothes with federal ID badges visible. The lobby didn't exactly stop, but it adjusted. The suits near the window straightened slightly. The receptionist stood up without appearing to realize she was doing it. Hawthorne scanned the room. He found Ethan in 3 seconds. He walked straight across the lobby, past the reception desk, past the cluster of Sterling executives who'd appeared from an inner office corridor, past the 2 suited men who'd presumably been waiting to greet him, and stopped in front of the man in the Navy work jacket. Captain, he said. General. Ethan extended his hand and Hawthorne took it with both of his. Not a handshake exactly, more the grip of one man telling another that the time apart hadn't changed the essential thing between them. You look the same, Hawthorne said. You look older, Ethan said. Hawthorne's mouth moved in what passed for a grin on a face that didn't do grins easily. Fair enough. He turned, still holding Ethan's arm slightly, and addressed the room. The executives, the panel members, the reception staff, everyone who'd rearranged their attention toward the entrance. This is Ethan Walker, he said. He served under me for 6 years in conditions that would have ended most careers before they started. He is the most instinctively capable mechanical analyst I've encountered in 40 years of service, and he will be consulting with our panel today. He looked back at Ethan. Anything you need before we start? A cup of coffee would be good, Ethan said. Black. Hawthorne looked at the receptionist. She was already reaching for the phone. Ethan looked across the lobby. Victoria Sterling was standing at the edge of the inner corridor, where she'd appeared from what seemed like seconds ago in the charcoal blazer, with the same controlled composure as before. But the composure had a crack in it now, small, precise. The particular look of someone who had made a fast calculation and arrived at an answer they wished they hadn't. She was looking at Ethan. Ethan met her eyes, briefly. He looked away first. Not because he was rattled, because there was nothing he needed to say yet, and Ethan Walker had always believed in letting moments breathe. The inspection was scheduled to begin in the facility's main technical briefing room, a long space with a central table, presentation screens at both ends, and a row of chairs along the wall for secondary personnel. Victoria led the way. Her pace was measured now, controlled, the very deliberate walk of a woman recalibrating in real time. Beside her, her operations director, a precise man named Jeffrey Marsh, who wore his competence like a pressed shirt, was murmuring something about the presentation sequence. Hawthorne walked alongside Ethan at the back of the group. "She didn't know who you were," Hawthorne said quietly. "No." "How'd she treat you?" Ethan considered the question. "Professionally," he said, which was technically accurate. Hawthorne looked at him sidelong. He'd known Ethan long enough to hear what wasn't being said. He said nothing else. They walked into the briefing room. The opening presentation was Victoria's. She was good. Ethan had to acknowledge that immediately and without reservation. She was composed, precise, fluent in the technical language without being evasive, and she'd clearly prepared for every likely line of inquiry. The slide deck was clean, the data presented well, the company's track record laid out in a way that was honest about limitations while being appropriately confident about capabilities. She was selling, but she was selling something real. The panel asked questions. Marsh fielded most of the technical ones with the rehearsed accuracy of a man who'd drilled these answers. The procurement data was solid. The facility certifications were in order. Ethan sat in the secondary chair row along the wall. He had a notepad. He'd been writing since the presentation began. Not aggressively, not conspicuously. Just notes. The kind of notes a person wrote when something was snagging against something they knew. Hawthorne had given him a clear signal at the door. "When you're ready." It took 40 minutes. "I have a question," Ethan said. It was the first time he'd spoken in the room. The presentation had moved on to the Vehicle Fleet Rehabilitation Plan, a detailed breakdown of proposed restoration protocols for the 40-vehicle fleet in question. Everyone looked at him. Victoria looked at him. "The Joint Seal Replacement Protocol," he said, looking at the screen. "Page 14 of the technical plan. It calls for a standard atmospheric cure at facility temperature." "That's correct," Marsh said. "Industry standard." "In a controlled facility?" "Yes." Ethan set down his pen. "What's the expected operational range for these vehicles post-deployment?" A pause. Marsh glanced at his tablet. "The spec sheet indicates operational range of—" "Not the spec sheet," Ethan said. "The actual deployment profile. These are going to guard units in the Northeast Corridor." "What's the thermal range they'll operate in?" Marsh typed something. "Estimated -15 to +95 Fahrenheit." "Okay." Ethan looked at Hawthorne. "The standard atmospheric cure process produces adequate seals between about 25 and 85 degrees. Below that threshold, you get micro-contraction at the joint interface that doesn't show up in facility testing because the vehicles are never cold-cycled before sign-off." He looked back at the screen. "First winter deployment, probably month 3, you're going to see seal failures at the upper joint assemblies. Not catastrophic, just expensive and avoidable." Silence. One of the panel members leaned forward. "What's the alternative?" "Controlled thermal cure at build," Ethan said. "Costs about 12% more per vehicle in process time. Adds maybe 2 days to the rehabilitation schedule. Eliminates the field failure risk entirely." He paused. "I had the same conversation 6 years ago about a different vehicle fleet in a different context. We didn't make the change because the cost estimate scared someone. We spent 4 times as much in field repairs 2 years later." He picked up his pen and went back to his notepad. The room was very quiet. Victoria was looking at him. She wasn't performing composure anymore. She was looking at him the way a person looks at something they hadn't fully understood until this moment, when the full shape of it became clear. "That's—" Marsh started, then stopped. He was reviewing something on his tablet. He looked up at Ethan. "That's actually supported by the thermal dynamics data in the component analysis. We had a flag on that from the materials team 6 weeks ago that got tabled in the budget review." "Tabled, not dismissed?" "Tabled." "So you knew about it?" Marsh looked at Victoria. "We had the data." Ethan nodded. He didn't make it anything more than a nod. He looked back at his notepad. "What else?" Hawthorne asked. And Ethan talked. He talked for 2.5 hours. Not continuously, The panel asked questions. Marsh responded. Victoria navigated. The room moved through its process. But Ethan was in the room now in a way he hadn't been when he was sitting silently in the chair row. His voice was level, his observations specific, his recommendations grounded in the particular authority of someone who'd seen what happened when good enough became the standard in the field. He identified 3 additional systemic vulnerabilities in the rehabilitation protocol. None fatal, none obvious without the specific combination of mechanical experience and field operational knowledge that he carried. Each one was documented. Each one had a practical fix. Each one was something the panel noted and the review record captured. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was working the same way he worked in the Bay, methodically, honestly, with the specific focus of a man who cared about what the thing he was looking at actually did in the real world. Victoria watched him through all of it. She asked 2 questions herself toward the end of the session. Both of them were sharp, specific, and revealed that she understood the technical landscape better than she'd shown in the presentation. She was testing him, Ethan recognized, not aggressively, but carefully, the way an intelligent person tested something they wanted to actually understand. He answered both questions directly. He was right about one. On the second, he said, "I'd want to see the materials testing data before I confirm that," which was honest, and she nodded once in a way that seemed to mean she respected it. Well, by 3:40, the formal review was concluding. Hawthorne reviewed his panel's notes, conferred briefly with the 2 federal assessors, and addressed the room. "Sterling Defense Solutions is a strong candidate for this contract," he said. "The company infrastructure is solid, the leadership is capable, and the facility meets our core requirements." He paused. "The technical protocol will require revision in several areas identified today before final certification. Those revisions are achievable. We'll have formal recommendations in writing within 10 days. He looked at Ethan. "I want to note for the record that the independent technical consultation provided today was unusually valuable. The field application insights identified today represent the kind of knowledge that doesn't appear in textbooks or spec sheets, and the panel's assessment has been materially improved by that input." He said it formally because formal records mattered, but he was looking at Ethan when he said it, and what was in his expression was something older than formality. "I knew you'd show up for it." Ethan looked down at his notepad. He had 37 pages of notes. He'd need to type them up before the documentation request came from the panel. He'd do it tonight, after Lily's show. He checked his watch. 4:12. He had 2 hours and 18 minutes. The panel members began gathering their materials. The Sterling staff moved in the slightly dazed way of people who'd expected one kind of meeting and gotten another. Ethan was capping his pen when he heard footsteps approach. Measured, deliberate. He looked up. Victoria Sterling stopped 2 feet from him. Her arms weren't crossed. Her expression wasn't the managed composure face she'd maintained through most of the day. She looked, for the first time since he'd encountered her, like a person rather than a position. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Miss Sterling." She hesitated. Not long, a second, maybe less, but he noticed it. "I owe you an apology," she said, "from this morning, at the entrance." He waited. "I assumed—" She stopped. "I made an assumption about who you were based on what you looked like, and I said something in front of my staff that I shouldn't have said, and I said it in a way that—" Another stop. She was choosing carefully. "It was dismissive, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry." He looked at her for a moment. There was something real in it. He could tell the difference. He'd received enough pro forma apologies to recognize when someone was actually sitting inside the words rather than reciting them. "I appreciate that," he said. "I didn't know who you were." "You didn't have to know who I was," he said. "Not hard, not pointed, just level. Nobody should have to hand you a resume to be spoken to with basic respect." She absorbed that. He watched her absorb it, not deflect it, not reframe it, just take it and sit with it. "No," she said finally. "They shouldn't." He nodded. She looked down at the notepad in his hand. 37 pages, dense lines. "The SEAL protocol, the thermal cure. How long have you known about that specific failure mode? Personally, about 8 years, saw it happen in cold deployment, figured out the mechanism, looked up the materials science afterward to confirm what I'd already guessed. You teach that to other technicians? When they ask. Do they ask? Some do, he said. She was quiet for a moment. The note you sent with the delivery, the technical note about the thermal resistant coating, I didn't read it this morning. I was dealing with, I had the inspection and the... She stopped. I'm going to read it tonight. Okay, he said. He picked up his folder from the table. He had a daughter who had a show at 6:30, and he was not going to be late. He was halfway to the door when she called after him. Mr. Walker. He turned. Would you be willing to meet again? She said. Not like this. Somewhere neutral. I'd like to talk. He considered her for a moment. The honest version of the question he was asking himself was whether this was worth his time, and the honest answer was that he wasn't sure yet. I'm free next week, he said, after 3. I'll make that work, she said. He nodded once, turned back toward the door. He walked through the lobby, the same polished concrete floor, the same certifications on the walls, the same reception desk where the young woman with the headset tracked his exit with a different expression than the one she'd had that morning. He pushed through the main entrance. The October air was cold and sharp. The parking lot was quiet now. The government vehicles were still there, but their energy was different, the contained purposefulness of an official day wrapping up. His truck was where he'd left it. He got in, sat for a moment, and looked at the post-it note on the dashboard. Lily. School show, 6:30 p.m. Don't be late. He wasn't going to be late. He started the engine. The truck pulled out of the Sterling Defense Solutions main lot, the main lot, and headed toward the school where a 6-year-old in a green dress was preparing to do something important in front of an audience. And the only person in that audience whose opinion genuinely mattered to her was the man driving the old truck with the company logo stenciled on the door. Ethan Walker drove. He didn't think about the lobby or the briefing room or the general's commendation for the record or the apology that had been real enough to matter. He thought about whether he'd remembered to put Lily's water bottle in her backpack that morning. He hadn't. He'd pick one up on the way. The show ran 45 minutes. Lily sang 2 lines in the second song. She'd been practicing for 3 weeks. And she sang them in a voice that was slightly too quiet and perfectly on pitch. And she looked out at the audience immediately after to find her father's face. He was there. 3rd row, center seat, still in the work jacket. She found him in 2 seconds. She almost smiled, stopped herself because she was performing, but her eyes went bright in the way they did when something she'd been quietly worried about turned out to be okay. Ethan Walker watched his daughter sing and did not think about anything else at all. The technical note was 4 pages long. Victoria read it at 11:17 that night, sitting at her kitchen counter with a glass of water she'd poured and forgotten about, still in the same blazer she'd worn all day because she hadn't had a reason to take it off until now. She read it twice. The first time she read it the way she read most documents, scanning for the operative data, the bottom line, the actionable conclusion. She found those things easily. The note was clean, organized, written in the direct language of a person who'd learned to communicate in environments where clarity wasn't a preference, but a requirement. The second time, she read it more slowly. She read it the way you read something when you realize the thing in front of you is better than you expected it to be. And that realization makes you slightly uncomfortable because it implies a question you'd rather not answer. The question was, when did this arrive? She checked the invoice timestamp. The delivery had been logged at 10:23 a.m. The technical note was attached to the documentation package. It had been sitting in the procurement folder since before she'd walked up to a man in a work jacket in her lobby and sent him around back. She set the papers down on the counter. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. She lived 7 minutes from the facility, close enough to be convenient, close enough that she sometimes had trouble on nights like this, leaving work at work. The house was a reasonable size for one person, which is to say it was slightly too large, which is to say she'd bought it 3 years ago when she'd expected her circumstances to be different by now. She didn't think about that often. She was thinking about it now because it was late, and she was alone in a well-lit kitchen, reading a technical note written by a man whose name she hadn't asked for when she met him. She'd looked him up after the review concluded. Captain Ethan Walker, U.S. Army, retired, 12 years of service, 2 deployments, 1 extended, decorated for operational performance in conditions the public record described in general terms, and actual soldiers described in much more specific ones, or so she understood. Honorable discharge. Single father. Owner of Walker Automotive Restoration, a small shop that had, in 3 years of operation, developed a reputation among fleet operators in the region as the place you went when you needed the job done right and weren't interested in excuses. No website worth mentioning, no LinkedIn profile. 1 review site listing with 11 reviews, all 5 stars, none of them written with marketing language. Just people describing what the work had been and what it had cost, and that it had held. She thought about his face when she directed him to the service entrance, the way he hadn't argued, the way he'd just nodded and turned around and walked out. She hadn't thought about it in the moment because in the moment she'd had 14 other things competing for her attention. She was thinking about it now. She picked up her phone and drafted a message to her assistant. Schedule Walker Automotive, Ethan Walker. For a meeting next week, afternoon preferred. Reserve conference room B, not the main boardroom. She looked at the last sentence for a moment, then deleted it and added, Actually, I'll handle the scheduling directly. Get me his contact. She sent it, even though it was almost midnight, because Sarah had long since made peace with the fact that working for Victoria Sterling meant that the line between business hours and not business hours was a suggestion. Then she sat in her kitchen for another few minutes, not reading anything, just sitting. She was not by nature a person who lingered in discomfort. She'd built a career in a company on the specific talent for converting uncomfortable facts into forward motion, identifying the problem, assessing the cost, making the call, moving on. It was a useful quality. It had limitations. The limitation specifically was this: forward motion was not the same as understanding, and there were moments, not frequent but real, when she recognized that she'd moved fast through something she should have stood still inside for a little longer. She thought she was in one of those moments now. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. She didn't sleep particularly well. Ethan dropped Lily at school at 7:50 the next morning, came back to the garage and spent the first 2 hours of the day working on Peterson's transmission job with the focused silence of a man who preferred the company of mechanical problems to most other kinds. Marcus came in at 8:30, took one look at the work table, and said, "You rearranged the tool layout." "I always rearrange the tool layout when I'm thinking." "Yeah, I know." Marcus hung his jacket on the hook. "What are you thinking about?" "Transmission." Besides the transmission. Ethan set down the torque wrench. He straightened up and looked at the job in front of him. The transmission pulled out, laid bare, every component accessible and visible and honest about its condition. "Yesterday," he said. "The Sterling thing." "Yeah." Marcus was quiet for a moment, going through the opening routine, coffee maker, parts list, the brief assessment of the bay that he did every morning to see if anything had changed overnight. "How'd it go?" Ethan told him. Not all of it, not the way he'd tell someone who needed to know everything, but enough. The lobby. Hawthorne's call. The review. What he'd identified in the technical session. The apology at the end. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Ethan appreciated about him. "She apologized?" Marcus said when Ethan was done. "Yeah." "Was it real?" Ethan thought about it. "Yeah, it was real." Marcus poured coffee into a mug that said World's Okayest Mechanic, a gift from a cousin he'd mentioned exactly once. "What happens now?" "She wants to meet, next week." "About what?" "I don't know yet. Business, I assume." "You going to go?" Ethan picked up the torque wrench again. "Probably." Marcus nodded. He sat down on the stool at the secondary workbench and picked up the parts list. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you should." "Yeah?" "Yeah. The company has contract work we could realistically bid on, and—" He paused. "I mean, the way she treated you, the service entrance thing." That's not what this is about, Ethan said. I know it's not what it's about, Marcus said. I'm just saying, walking back in there with something to offer. That's not nothing. Ethan looked at him. I'm not looking to prove anything, he said. I know you're not. Marcus shrugged. That's kind of the point, though, isn't it? Ethan didn't answer that. He went back to the transmission. But after a few minutes, he found he was thinking less about the transmission and more about what Marcus had said, which was inconvenient. His phone showed a message from a number he didn't have saved. Mr. Walker, this is Victoria Sterling. I wanted to reach out directly rather than go through assistants. Would Tuesday at 3:30 work for you? I can come to your facility if that's more convenient. He read it twice. The offer to come to his facility was, he recognized, deliberate. She was doing the thing people did when they were trying to correct an imbalance, overcorrecting slightly in the other direction. He appreciated the gesture and didn't particularly need it. He typed back, Tuesday at 3:30 works. My facility is fine. He pressed send and put the phone in his pocket and went back to the transmission. Tuz. Tuesday arrived with the particular gray efficiency of late October in Virginia. Overcast, cold enough to matter, not cold enough to complain about. Ethan had told Marcus he was expecting a visitor at 3:30, which Marcus had responded to with the careful non-reaction of a person exercising significant restraint. He spent the morning on a brake system rebuild for a commercial fleet client, came up for lunch at 12:30, made a sandwich he ate standing over the counter, and spent an hour after lunch updating the parts inventory in the system's software that was 3 years old and functioned adequately enough that replacing it never made the priority list. At 3:23, a car pulled into the lot. It was a sensible car. Not flashy. A dark gray sedan, current model, clean but not ostentatiously maintained. Victoria got out of the driver's side. She was alone, which surprised him slightly. She dressed down, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Dark jeans, a navy jacket, shoes that were practical. She looked like a person making an effort to look less like a CEO, and he wasn't sure yet if that was authentic or strategic. He met her at the bay door. Mr. Walker, she said. Ms. Sterling. He stepped back. Come in. She walked into the bay and stopped. He watched her take it in. The organized workspace, the 2 lifts, the tool wall with its labeled positions, the second-hand but functional diagnostic equipment, the current job, a fleet van, partially disassembled, brake lines exposed. The smell of the place, oil, metal, the faint chemical edge of cleaning solvent. This is your operation, she said. Not a question exactly. This and the second bay, we lease both. How many people? Full-time, 2 including me. I use contract labor for surge capacity. She nodded. She was looking at the tool wall, the arrangement of it, the precision of it, with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely processing what they were seeing and not just performing interest. The brake job, she said, nodding toward the van. Is that a fleet client? Regional delivery company. 3rd vehicle this quarter. Repeat business. Most of our work is repeat or referral. She looked at him. Can we sit somewhere? I don't want to keep you standing in the cold. There was a small office at the back of the bay, more of a room with a desk and 2 chairs and a whiteboard covered in scheduling notations. It wasn't designed for guest meetings. Ethan had never hosted a guest meeting in it. Back office, he said. It's not much. That's fine. Top deck. She sat across from him at the desk, which was covered in the controlled paper disorder of a person who knew where everything was despite appearances. He'd made coffee before she arrived. He offered her a cup. She said yes. He poured 2 mugs and sat down, and they looked at each other for a moment with the particular social awareness of 2 people who'd had one encounter that established a specific dynamic and were now trying to negotiate what the next dynamic would be. I read your technical note, she said. How was it? Thorough. More thorough than I expected from a parts delivery. She wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. The thermal coating upgrade, we've used that specification on 2 subsequent components since the delivery. Your note flagged something our materials team had identified but hadn't prioritized. It's easy to deprioritize things that fail slowly, Ethan said. The cost shows up later, somewhere else, and nobody connects it back. That's exactly what happens. She looked at the mug. Jeffrey, my operations director, wants to send you a formal thank you. He doesn't have to do that. I know he doesn't have to. She looked up. I want to talk about something more substantive than that. He waited. The federal contract, if it comes through, and I think it will, based on how the review panel left, is going to require us to significantly expand our rehabilitation capability. We'll need vetted subcontractors with specific technical competencies. She paused. The gap you identified in our protocol on Thursday was real. We had the data and we didn't apply it. That's a process problem, but it's also a knowledge problem. We have excellent engineers. We have people who are very good at reading spec sheets and running the right tests in the right controlled conditions. But, Ethan said, there's a different kind of knowledge, she said. The kind that comes from actually using the thing in conditions where the spec sheet isn't present. You have that. Our engineers mostly don't. He looked at her. She was being direct, which he appreciated. She was also being careful. He could see her choosing words with the precision of someone who'd thought about this conversation before having it. What are you proposing? He said. A subcontracting relationship initially. Walker Automotive takes on the joint seal and suspension rehabilitation work for the fleet. Your protocols, your quality standards. We provide the components and the facility access. You provide the technical execution and oversight. She paused. Beyond that, I'd like to explore bringing you in as a technical consultant on an ongoing basis, not embedded in the company, on your terms, but available. Ethan looked at the whiteboard behind her, the scheduling grid, the names of the jobs, the timelines, the capacity constraints that were already showing up in the October-November column. What does the subcontract volume look like? He said. She gave him numbers. She'd done the math before she came. He could tell by the way she cited them, without checking notes, which meant she'd internalized them. The volume was significant. Not transformative, not company changing overnight, but real. The kind of contract that would require him to expand his capacity, which meant decisions about people and space and capital. He was quiet for a moment, turning it over. There's something I want to discuss before we talk terms, he said. She waited. Marcus Green works for me, Ethan said. He's been here 3 years. He came out of a workforce re-entry program. He had a record. He needed someone to take a chance on him. I needed someone who could actually do the work. He looked at her. He is right now better at this job than most mechanics I've encountered. He has more capability than his current role reflects, and part of that is because I haven't had the capacity to give him more. The other part is that the industry doesn't make it easy for people with his background to get in the door. Victoria was listening. Her expression hadn't changed, but she was very still. If we build a subcontracting relationship, Ethan said, I want Marcus to be part of it at a level that reflects what he can actually do, not what his file says he should be trusted with. Meaning? Meaning he leads jobs. He's the point person on site for the work his team is doing, not an extra pair of hands, a lead. That's not a complicated request, she said. It's not, Ethan agreed, but I want it said explicitly, not assumed. She nodded. Explicitly, Marcus Green participates in the subcontract as a lead technician with appropriate authority and compensation. We can put that in the agreement language. Ethan picked up his coffee. Okay. That was your condition? Part of it. She looked at him with the expression of someone who'd expected a longer negotiation. What's the rest? L'ensemble. He told her about the apprenticeship idea over the second cup of coffee, not as a fully formed proposal. He'd had the idea in different forms for a while, but he hadn't shaped it into a pitch. He just described it plainly. Young people in the county who needed a trade, who needed structured access to something real, who weren't going to get that access through traditional channels for reasons that had more to do with circumstance than capability. Paid, he said. Not stipends. Actual wages for actual work. And real technical training, not busy work apprenticeships where someone hands you a broom for 6 months. Victoria had stopped drinking her coffee. She was watching him with a quality of attention he recognized as different from the attention she'd given the contract numbers. This was personal, not professional. The distinction was small, but visible. How many apprentices are you thinking? She said. 4 to start. rotate through different aspects of the work: diagnostics, component rebuild, systems testing, 12 months minimum per cycle. He paused. The company contributes to the wage cost. I contribute the training and the program structure. At the end, they have a marketable certification and actual experience, and they can go wherever they want. And some of them might stay. Some of them might stay, he agreed. I'm not doing it to build a pipeline, but I'm not against it either. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the bay, a car went past on the street. Marcus's radio from the second bay, a country station he played at low volume, was just audible through the wall. My father started this company, Victoria said. She wasn't looking at Ethan. She was looking at the mug in her hands. He built it from a regional parts distributor into a defense contractor over 20 years. He was the kind of person who knew the name of every person in the building, from the dock workers to the engineers. A pause. He died 4 years ago. I took over at 26, which was... She stopped. It was not a smooth transition. I had to make the company survive first, and then I had to make it grow. And somewhere in between surviving and growing, some things didn't get enough attention. She looked up. I think about that, she said, more than I probably admit. Ethan looked at her. He didn't fill the silence with anything, because she hadn't finished. The way I treated you, she said, that morning, that wasn't... I don't want to tell you I'm not that person, because the truth is I was that person in that moment. I was rushing, and I was stressed, and I made a judgment based on a jacket and a truck, and I said something that I wouldn't want said to me. She met his eyes. I'm not asking you to tell me it was fine, because it wasn't. I'm just trying to... She exhaled. I'm trying to be honest with you about who I am right now and who I'm trying to be. He considered that. I've been underestimated enough times that I've stopped taking it personally, he said. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means I've gotten better at knowing what it is. What is it? People see what they expect to see, he said. You expected a delivery driver. You saw a delivery driver. The problem isn't the assumption. People make assumptions. That's just how thinking works. The problem is when the assumption becomes the whole story and you stop looking. She was quiet. For what it's worth, he said, you stopped. After the inspection, you stopped and you looked. He shrugged one shoulder. That matters. Does it fix it? No, he said simply. But it's not nothing either. She nodded. She looked like someone absorbing something that was true and not entirely comfortable. They talked for another hour. The conversation moved between the practical and the personal in the irregular way of two people who were negotiating something that wasn't quite captured by business language. They talked about the subcontract terms, the apprenticeship structure, the timeline for the federal rehabilitation program. They talked, briefly, about the facility. She asked about the second bay, whether he'd ever considered owning rather than leasing, and he said the capital wasn't there yet in a way that was straightforward and not embarrassed. She told him at one point that the technical session on Thursday had resulted in the panel returning 2 days early with a revised recommendation. The protocol revisions he'd identified had been incorporated into the evaluation criteria, which meant Sterling would need to revise their proposal before submission. Which is annoying, she said. But it's the right outcome. If we'd gone forward with the original protocol and hit those seal failures in the field, it would have cost us the contract renewal, not just the initial award. And somebody in a cold field would have had a broken vehicle, Ethan said. She looked at him. Yes, that too. He got the sense she'd been about to say something else, something that started with the contract value and ended with something more important, and that she'd caught herself. He didn't say anything about it. People got there at their own speed. She left at 5:15. The October dark was already coming in at the edges of the sky, the particular blue-gray of late afternoon in the season. At the bay door, she paused. Tuesday was good, she said. Yeah, he said. I'll have our legal team draft the subcontract language by the end of the week. I'll send it directly to you. Okay. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the lot. Her car was the only one there now. Marcus had left at 4:30 to pick up his nephew, a standing Tuesday arrangement. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. How do you do it? She was still looking out at the lot, not at him. All of it. The shop, the delivery, raising your daughter by yourself. The inspection on Thursday, She stopped. You just walked in and did the work like it was nothing, and then you went to a school show, and you're here doing the work today. How do you keep it all in order? He thought about the water stain on his bedroom ceiling, the 4 alarm reminders for the school show, the sandwich he'd eaten standing up, the post-it notes. It's not in order, he said. It's just moving. She looked at him. You keep moving, he said. Some days that's all it is. She nodded slowly. Something in her face was different from the controlled expression she'd maintained for most of the afternoon. Quieter, and in that quietness, more real. Thank you for the meeting, she said. Thank you for coming here, he said, and he meant it without ceremony. She walked to her car. He watched her pull out of the lot. Then he went back into the bay, turned off the main lights, checked the lock on the parts cabinet, and picked up his jacket from the hook. He had 40 minutes before Lily would be done with her after-school program. Enough time to stop by the supply house for the brake line fittings he needed tomorrow morning. He wrote it on the back of his hand so he wouldn't forget. Marcus came in Wednesday morning with the kind of energy that meant he'd been thinking about something since yesterday. Ethan was already at the bench when he arrived. He waited. Marcus hung up his jacket, poured his coffee, and stood in the middle of the bay with the mug in his hand. So, Marcus said. So, Ethan said. She came here. She came here. And? We talked about a subcontract and a consulting arrangement. Ethan didn't look up from the brake line assembly he was working on. And an apprenticeship program. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Apprenticeship program? Paid, real training, 4 spots to start. Marcus set his mug down on the workbench. He looked at Ethan with an expression Ethan couldn't entirely read, something between surprise and something older and less easily named. You did that because of me, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I did that because it needs to exist, Ethan said. You happen to be evidence that it works. Marcus picked his mug back up. He looked at the bay, the tools, the lift, the job on the rack. He'd come in through a workforce program 3 years ago with a 2-year-old assault conviction, a mechanical aptitude score that had surprised the caseworker, and the specific posture of a man who'd been told enough times what he was and wasn't capable of that he'd started to believe it. He didn't have that posture anymore. You could have asked for a lot more, Marcus said. Like what? Money, equity, consulting fees that actually reflected Thursday's review. I'll get fair compensation, Ethan said. I negotiated that. I'm just saying you had leverage and you used it for Marcus. Yeah. Stop. Marcus stopped. He drank his coffee. After a moment, he said, okay. Ethan handed him the brake line he'd finished. Check the fitting seal on that and tell me if the diameter's right for the van. Marcus checked the fitting seal. It's right, he said. Good, Ethan said. Let's get to work. Well, the subcontract agreement arrived Friday, as Victoria had said it would. Ethan read it at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, with a yellow highlighter and a red pen, the way he read every contract, systematically, looking for the places where the words said something different from what had been agreed in the room. The agreement was clean. Better than clean, actually. The apprenticeship language was specific and enforceable. The lead technician language for Marcus was explicit. The compensation structure was fair. Whoever had drafted it had listened carefully to what had been discussed on Tuesday and translated it accurately. He made 2 minor notes in the margins, things that needed clarification rather than change. He wrote a brief email to Victoria with the notes attached. She replied at 10:50 p.m. Both points fair. We'll have legal revise and reissue Monday. Thank you for the close read. He stared at the response for a moment. Then he closed his laptop and went to bed. He didn't have trouble sleeping. Saturday, he took Lily to the hardware store because the water stain had reached a point where ignoring it wasn't going to be sustainable much longer. She walked through the aisles beside him with the serious attention she gave to any errand she'd been explicitly invited on, occasionally asking questions about the products on the shelves that ranged from genuinely curious to completely inexplicable. What's this for? She held up a package of copper pipe fittings. Plumbing. What's plumbing? The pipes in the walls that carry water. Do we have those? Every house has those. She considered this. Where are ours? In the walls. She looked at the nearest wall with the expression of someone who had just discovered the world was more complicated than previously understood. Then she put the fittings back on the shelf and caught up with him. He found the drywall compound he needed, and the tape, and the paint in the right shade. He'd pulled the paint coat off the original can he'd found in the garage, which meant the repair would actually match the ceiling, which he considered a minor organizational victory. At the checkout, Lily arranged the items on the conveyor belt by size, smallest to largest, because she was 6, and this was how she'd decided things should be done. The cashier smiled at her. Lily accepted this with dignity. In the parking lot, carrying the bag to the truck, Lily said, "Dad?" "Yeah." "Are we going to fix the ceiling thing?" "That's why we bought the stuff." "Today?" "This afternoon." She thought about this. "Can I help?" "You can hand me things." She considered the job description. "Okay," she said, as if she were accepting a position of some responsibility. He loaded the bag into the truck bed and lifted her into the cab. She buckled her own seatbelt. She'd insisted on doing it herself for the past 3 months, and sat up straight with the particular satisfaction of a child who had contributed to a plan. Ethan got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. The sky was clear, cold and clear, the way October went sometimes, all that blue pressing down on everything, making the world look sharp at the edges. He drove home. The ceiling waited. The work waited. Monday would come, and the revised contract, and after that the subcontract start, and the apprenticeship conversations, and all the things that had been set in motion that week in ways he hadn't planned for when he'd loaded the truck that Tuesday morning with 2 pallets of suspension components. He wasn't thinking about any of that right now. He was thinking about whether he had enough drop cloth to cover the bedroom floor, and whether Lily would last 20 minutes handing him tools before she got bored and wandered off to find something else to do, and what they were going to have for dinner, and whether the leftover chili from Wednesday was still good. Lily was humming in the passenger seat. That song with no melody, the one that meant she was comfortable. He drove. The revised subcontract came Monday morning, as promised. Ethan signed it at the kitchen table before Lily woke up, using a pen that skipped twice on the signature line and required him to press harder than he'd intended. He scanned the pages with his phone, sent the files back to Victoria's email, and put the original copy in the file folder he kept in the second-hand filing cabinet in the corner of the small room he called an office but was really just a bedroom with a desk in it. He made coffee. He looked at the ceiling in the hallway, the repair he'd done Saturday, which had dried overnight and looked, in his honest assessment, about 85% right. The paint match was close. The texture wasn't perfect. You'd only notice if you were looking for it. He'd noticed it every time he walked past since Sunday afternoon. He told himself he'd sand it and redo the texture coat next weekend. He wrote it on the legal pad on the kitchen counter. Then he poured his coffee and started thinking about the Monday jobs, and the texture coat moved to the back of the list, where it would probably stay until the next time he walked past and looked up. Some things were like that. Ika. The first subcontract job started 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in mid-November, when the cold had stopped being seasonal and started being serious. Sterling's facility had allocated 2 of its rehabilitation bays for the Walker protocols, which was more than Ethan had expected and slightly less space than he actually needed. He'd spent the week before doing the site assessment, walking the bays with Marcus, measuring clearances, identifying the equipment gaps, and drafting a setup specification that Jeffrey Marsh had reviewed with the efficiency of a man who liked receiving documentation that told him exactly what was needed. The equipment gaps got filled in 4 days. Marsh was faster than Ethan had expected. "He's good," Marcus said, on the 3rd day, watching Marsh navigate a vendor call with the flat certainty of someone who knew exactly what the number on the purchase order was going to be. "He is," Ethan said. "Doesn't waste words." "No." Marcus looked at him. "Kind of like someone else I know." Ethan didn't respond to that. He went back to the setup checklist. The first 2 apprentice candidates arrived the following Monday. Not 4. The program had taken longer to formalize than anticipated, which Ethan had expected, because programs always took longer to formalize than anticipated. 2 to start. Real wages, as agreed. Real work, as agreed. Their names were Deshaun Pritchard and Carla Reyes. Deshaun was 19, from the east side of the county, with hands that were already calloused in ways that told Ethan he'd been doing some kind of manual work for years. He was quiet in the way that young men were quiet when they weren't sure yet whether the situation was going to hold what it was promising. Carla was 22, had done a year of community college before running out of money, and had applied for the apprenticeship through a workforce development notice posted at her library branch. She asked more questions in the first hour than most people asked in a week. Not scattered questions, focused ones. The kind that meant she was building a mental model of the system and filling in the gaps as fast as she encountered them. Ethan gave them both the same first-day speech, which wasn't really a speech. He talked to them the way he talked to Marcus in the Bay, directly and without condescension, about what the work was, what the standards were, and what they could expect from him. "I don't care what you knew before you walked in here," he said. "I care what you learn while you're here and whether you can apply it under pressure. If you don't know something, say so. If you make a mistake, own it. If you see something wrong and don't say anything, that's the one thing I can't work with." Deshaun nodded. Carla was writing something in a small notebook she'd brought. Ethan looked at the notebook. "That's good?" he said. She looked up. "What is?" "Writing things down." He turned back to the workbench. "Let's start with the joint assembly." Victoria came by the Sterling facility the third day of the subcontract work. Not officially. She didn't schedule it, didn't bring Marsh, didn't make it an inspection. She appeared in the bay doorway at 2 in the afternoon in a coat that was more practical than her usual work clothes, carrying a coffee she'd clearly made from the building's machine rather than a cafe, and she stood at the edge of the workspace and watched for a few minutes before Ethan noticed her. "You don't have to hover in the doorway," he said. She came in. She walked through the space with the careful movements of someone in a workspace that wasn't hers, not touching anything, keeping clear of the active areas. She stopped near the workbench where Deshaun was learning the thermal cure process under Marcus's direction. Marcus was explaining the temperature gradient, the specific window, why it mattered, what happened outside it. He was explaining it the way Ethan explained things, not from a manual, from knowledge. The language was plain and the reasoning was visible. Deshaun was listening the way you listened when something was finally making sense. Victoria watched this for a moment. "He's good," she said quietly when she'd come to stand near Ethan. "Marcus?" "Yeah. How long did it take you to realize that?" Ethan thought about it. "About 2 weeks after he started. Maybe less. And before those 2 weeks? I knew he could do the work. It took 2 weeks to see how fast he'd go past it." She looked at him. "Is there a difference between can do and will exceed?" "Yes," he said. Can do is about current capability. Will exceed is about trajectory. You hire for one, you end up investing in the other if you're paying attention. She looked back at Marcus and Deshaun. "We don't always do that well," she said. "At Sterling, we hire for credential a lot." "Most places do." "I know. I'm not defending it." She paused. "I'm thinking about how to change it." Ethan watched her for a moment. She wasn't performing the thought, she was actually in it, actually working through something. He recognized the look because it was one he was familiar with from his own reflection. The particular expression of a person who has identified a problem in their own system and is deciding whether they have the courage to actually address it. "You'll get pushback," he said. "From whom?" "Your hiring managers. Probably your board. Anyone who's comfortable with the current system because the current system has worked fine for them." He shrugged one shoulder. "Change that requires someone at the top to hold the line." "I can hold a line," she said. "I know," he said. "I watched you run that review session." She looked at him. There was something brief in her expression, not quite surprise, but adjacent to it. He realized she hadn't expected that. The acknowledgement. From him, specifically. He went back to the component he'd been examining before she arrived. The contract work settled into a rhythm over the following weeks that Ethan recognized as sustainable, which was the thing he always looked for first in any new arrangement, not whether it was exciting, but whether it would hold. Sustainable rhythm meant showing up at the Sterling facility 4 days a week, managing the apprentice training alongside the active rehabilitation work, and keeping the Walker Bay running with Marcus handling the commercial fleet contracts that had been the backbone of the business before Sterling. It was a lot. He didn't tell anyone it was a lot because that seemed like a complaint about a situation he'd chosen, and Ethan Walker didn't complain about situations he'd chosen. Marcus told him it was a lot on a Wednesday in late November, over the phone, when Ethan was still at the Sterling facility at 6:45 trying to resolve a component discrepancy before the day's documentation closed. "You're still there," Marcus said. "Discrepancy in the heat treatment log. Third component batch. Can it wait until tomorrow?" "No." "Then can someone else close it?" "I want to close it myself." Marcus was quiet for a moment. In the background, Ethan could hear the sound of the bay at the garage, the radio, the compressor, the particular ambient noise of the space he'd built. "What time did you get there this morning?" 7:15. "Ethan, I'm fine." "You've said that so many times it stopped meaning anything." The discrepancy was in the third component's temperature record, a logging gap that was probably a system error rather than an actual process deviation, but probably wasn't good enough for a federal contract documentation package. He needed the actual temperature trace from the control unit, which meant pulling the data manually from the Bay controller software, which meant another 20 minutes. "I'm going to be done in 20 minutes, Ethan said. "Tell me what you need from the garage." The Peterson account called. "They want to add a third vehicle to the maintenance contract." "That's good. It's good if we have the capacity." "Do we have the capacity?" He pulled up the temperature trace on the Bay controller screen. The data was there. The log gap was a recording interface error, not a process deviation. He noted it in the documentation with the trace data as evidence and closed the file. "We'll have the capacity," he said. "How?" "I'm working on it." Working on it meaning you've thought about it, or working on it meaning you have an actual plan? Marcus. "Which one?" "I've thought about it." Marcus made the sound that meant he was accepting an incomplete answer under protest. "Get out of there," he said. "Lily gets picked up at 6 from after school." "I know when Lily gets picked up." "Then go get her." Ethan was already shutting down the workstation. "Tell Peterson we'll call them back Thursday." "Already did." He locked the bay, said goodnight to the Sterling security team at the front desk, and walked out into the cold parking lot with the temperature trace documentation in his folder and a headache that had started around 4 and wasn't getting better. He was 14 minutes late to pick up Lily. She was fine. She was in the after-school room with 2 other kids who also had parents running behind, doing a puzzle on the floor. She looked up when he came in, assessed his face the way she'd been doing more lately, and said, "You have your tired eyes." "I'm not tired," he said. She looked at him with the particular diplomacy of a child who had decided not to argue with something that was obviously wrong. "Okay," she said. She put the puzzle piece she was holding back in the box, stood up, and got her backpack. In the truck, he looked at her in the passenger seat. She was looking out the window. The streetlights were coming on, orange against the early dark of late November. "Good day," he said. "We did fractions." "How were fractions?" She thought about it. "Confusing. But then I got it. Then it was okay. That's how fractions work," he said. She looked at him. "Is that how everything works?" He considered the question more seriously than a 6-year-old probably intended. "A lot of things," he said. She nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to looking out the window. He drove home. He made dinner, pasta, because it was fast and she'd eat it without negotiation, and some nights that was the deciding factor. He helped her with the reading homework she'd been putting off, which was 2 pages in a book about a mouse who wanted to be an astronaut. He did the dishes. He got her through the bath and bedtime sequence, which on tired nights had a specific friction to it that required patience he had to consciously locate. At 8:40, she was asleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the temperature trace documentation and a yellow legal pad and reviewed the day's work for another 40 minutes, making notes for the morning. Then he put the legal pad down and sat with his hands around a cold cup of coffee he'd forgotten to drink and looked at the kitchen wall. He was tired, not broken, not done. Just tired, the way a person got tired when they were doing real work in a real life that had real weight. He knew the difference between tired that passed and tired that meant something, and this was the former. He'd slept through worse. He'd gotten up from worse. But he sat there for another few minutes before he moved, because he'd learned in the years since the divorce and the discharge and the reboot of everything that it was useful to sit inside the hard moments rather than always moving through them. Not to wallow. Just to look at what was real and let it be real for a minute before you put it away. What was real was this. He was building something. It was expensive. In time, in energy, in the cognitive load of managing more moving parts than his old system had been designed for. But it was working. Deshaun had come in Tuesday with a question that showed he'd been thinking about the thermal cure process overnight, turning it over on his own time, which meant something was taking root. Carla had identified a documentation inconsistency in the third batch's process log before Ethan had seen it himself, and the way she'd flagged it, matter of fact, no drama, just here's what I found, had made him realize she was going to be good at this, really good. And Marcus was leading jobs, actually leading them, making calls, managing timelines, communicating with Marcia's team in the direct language of someone who knew exactly what the work required and wasn't interested in pretending otherwise. 3 years ago, Marcus had come through a program door with a record and a skill set nobody had taken seriously. Now he was the lead technician on a federal subcontract. That was real too. Ethan picked up the cold coffee, took a sip, and made a face. He poured it down the drain and went to bed. The federal contract confirmation came in the second week of December. Ethan found out from Victoria, who called him directly at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning while he was in the middle of a brake system diagnostic at the Sterling facility. "We got it," she said. When she said it, her voice had something in it that she didn't usually let into her voice, something unguarded, the sound of a person who had been holding a lot of tension for a long time and had just felt it release by 1 degree. "The full contract," he said. "Full contract. 40 vehicles, 18-month rehabilitation program, with an option period for an additional 24 months if the performance review passes." She paused. The panel's recommendation included a specific note on the revised protocol. The thermal cure process is now a condition of the contract. Ethan set down the diagnostic scanner. "That's good." "It's very good." Another pause. "I wanted you to know first." He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he said, "Thank you for calling. There's going to be a team announcement this afternoon. And Ethan." She used his name, which she'd started doing more in recent weeks, still carefully, still with a quality of deliberateness that meant something. "The apprenticeship program. I want to expand it. 4 spots to 8. I've talked to the board and they've agreed to fund the additional wages." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." He looked out the bay door at the cold December lot. "When do you want to announce?" "January, new year, new program cycle. I was thinking we could do a small event, not a press thing, something internal, for the apprentices, for Marcus's team, for the people doing the actual work." She paused. "I thought you might have ideas about the right kind of event." "Keep it simple," he said immediately. "Don't make it a ceremony. Just bring everyone together, say what's true, let people get back to work." A brief pause on her end, then, "That's exactly what I was going to say." "I know," he said. He heard something in the silence after that. Not quite amusement, but something that lived near it. "I'll talk to you this afternoon," she said. "I'll be here." She hung up. Ethan stood in the bay doorway for a moment with his phone in his hand and the cold coming in around the edges of the door. The diagnostic scanner was on the bench. The vehicle needed another 40 minutes of work. Marsh would be wanting a status update by noon. He went back to work. He told Marcus at lunch. They ate in the truck, a habit from the early Walker days when there was no office and the cab was the warmest place to eat, with sandwiches from the gas station across from the facility because neither of them had thought to bring food. "Full contract," Marcus said. He said it the way you said something you'd wanted to hear for long enough that hearing it took a minute to process. 40 vehicles, 18 months with option. Marcus looked at his sandwich. He took a bite. He chewed. He was quiet for longer than the news required, which meant he was sitting inside it. 8 apprentices, Ethan added. Marcus looked at him. 8. Starting January. Marcus looked back at the windshield. Outside, a delivery truck was turning into the facility lot, brake lights flashing in the gray December light. When you hired me, Marcus said, I thought it was going to be 3 months. I figured you'd find a reason. A reason for what? A reason it wasn't working. A reason to let me go. He picked at the wrapper on the sandwich. That's what happened the last 2 times. Places that were doing the workforce thing. They'd take you on, and then around month 3, month 4, something would come up. Budget, performance, whatever, and you'd be out. Ethan looked at him. I thought you were going to do the same thing, Marcus said. I was waiting for it the whole first year. I know, Ethan said. Marcus looked at him sharply. You knew? I could tell. The way you did the work, the way you checked everything twice and never left early and never pushed back even when I was wrong about something. That's what someone does when they're not sure the floor is going to hold. Marcus was quiet. The floor was going to hold, Ethan said. I should have said that earlier. You didn't need to say it, Marcus said. You showed it. Ethan looked at the windshield. A cloud had moved in from the west, dropping the light by several shades. Deshaun, Ethan said. Yeah? He's going to be good. He's already good. He doesn't know it yet. Marcus nodded slowly. Carla knows it. She's going to be great, and she knows that too, which is fine. Deshaun's going to need someone to tell him. I know, Ethan said. That's why I'm telling you. Marcus looked at him for a moment. You want me to do that? You're his direct supervisor, and you know what it's like to not hear it. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Outside, the delivery truck finished its turn and disappeared around the back of the building. Okay, Marcus said. I can do that? I know you can, Ethan said. They ate in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that had been built up over 3 years of mornings in the bay and wasn't threatened by the absence of words. So what happens now? Marcus said, when they were both nearly done. We go back to work, Ethan said. And after that? We go back to work again. Marcus crumpled his sandwich wrapper. You're not very inspiring sometimes. You know that? I'm very inspiring, Ethan said. You're just not paying attention. Marcus laughed, a real one, the kind that came up fast and genuine. It was a good sound in the cold cab of the old truck. 2 days before Christmas, Victoria called again. This time the call was different, not urgent, not business-focused, more tentative than her usual register. I wanted to ask you something, she said. Okay. The team event in January, the apprenticeship announcement. I was thinking about inviting General Hawthorne. Ethan considered this. Why? Because without the inspection, none of this happens. Because he's the reason you were in that room. A pause. And because I want to thank him, properly. You can do that separately. The event isn't about that. I know it's not. She paused. I want him there because I think there's something important about the people in that room seeing the full picture. The apprentices, Marcus, the technicians. They should know how this started, what it took, who was involved. Ethan thought about this. You want them to know that a 2-star general walked past a room full of executives to go find a man who'd been sent around to the service entrance. A long pause. Yes, she said. I do. That's going to be uncomfortable for you. I'm aware. You're going to stand in a room and let that story be told. I think I should, she said. Her voice was level, but he could hear the particular quality of something that was costing her something. I think the people who are going to spend the next 18 months doing this work deserve to know who did it and why and what it actually looked like. Ethan was quiet. It also means telling them about the lobby, he said. Yes, it means that. He let that sit for a moment. Invite Hawthorne, he said. He'll come. You're sure? I'm sure. He cares about this kind of program more than almost anything. Tell him about the apprentices. Tell him about Deshawn and Carla. He'll be there." "Okay." The line was quiet. "Merry Christmas, Ethan." He hadn't expected that. Not because it was an unusual thing to say, but because of the particular way she said it. Not the professional courtesy version, just the two words themselves, without anything attached. "Merry Christmas," he said. She hung up. He put the phone on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment in the quiet house. Lily was at her grandmother's for the afternoon. His mother, who lived 30 minutes away, and had been, since the divorce, a more consistent presence in their lives than he'd had the right to expect or ask for. The house had the specific quality of quietness it only got when Lily wasn't in it. Not empty, exactly, just different. The objects in it were the same, the spaces were the same, but without her moving through it, the place felt like a sentence missing its subject. He'd learned to be okay in it. Mostly. He picked up the phone again and looked at the calendar. 11 days until the New Year. 8 days until Christmas, which they'd spend at his mother's because his mother's house had more room and a real tree and the tradition of making a specific meal that Lily had decided was the only acceptable Christmas meal, and Ethan had no interest in disrupting. He'd gotten Lily 2 presents. One was a kit for learning basic electrical circuits. She'd seen it in a store window and pressed her nose against the glass for 30 seconds, which was her way of indicating strong interest without asking directly. The other was the blue dress, clean and dry, wrapped in paper with a bow she'd be able to untie herself. He wasn't sure which one she'd like more. He thought probably the dress. The New Year came in with the kind of anticlimactic efficiency that New Year's usually had when you spent them at home with a 6-year-old who was asleep by 9:30 and didn't particularly care about the abstract significance of the date change. Ethan watched the ball drop on a television he'd had for 7 years, ate the last of the Christmas cookies his mother had sent home with them, and went to bed at 10:15. He didn't make resolutions. He'd stopped making resolutions years ago because he'd found they were mostly a way of deferring to a future version of himself that didn't exist yet. He wrote things on legal pads. He set reminders on his phone. He showed up. January 3rd, he was at the Sterling facility at 7:30. Marcus was already in the bay. Carla arrived at 7:52, 8 minutes early, notebook already out. Deshawn got there at 8:01, breathing hard, having clearly run from the parking lot. "Traffic," Deshawn said. "You live 7 minutes away," Marcus said. "Long lights." "Get here earlier." Deshawn looked at Marcus with the expression of a 19-year-old assessing whether this was going to be a problem. Marcus met the look steadily, without escalating it. "Yes, sir," Deshawn said, and went to his station. Ethan was watching this from the far end of the bay, making a note on the day's schedule. Marcus came over 10 minutes later. "Too harsh?" "No," Ethan said. "You were right, and you said it once. That's exactly right." Marcus nodded. He looked back at Deshawn, who was already setting up his station with the specific care of someone trying to make up for being a minute late. "He's going to be on time every day from now on." "Yeah," Ethan said. "He is." The announcement event was the 3rd Thursday of January. Victoria had organized it with the same attention to detail she brought to everything. Not elaborate, but considered. The company cafeteria, reconfigured, chairs in a loose arrangement rather than rows, no podium, food laid out on a side table because someone had decided this was a gathering rather than a presentation. General Hawthorne arrived in civilian clothes, a jacket and slacks, no uniform, which Ethan suspected was intentional and respected. Marcus's team was there. Deshawn and Carla were there with the other 6 newly confirmed apprentices. 4 men, 2 women, ranging from 19 to 27, all of them wearing the slight wariness of people who'd been told something good was happening and were reserving final judgment until they saw it. Sterling's engineering team was there. Marsh was there. The procurement staff, the floor supervisors, a cross-section of the company that represented the actual operation rather than the organizational chart. Victoria stood up without a microphone. The room wasn't big enough to need one. And she talked for 12 minutes. She talked about what the contract meant for the company. She talked about what the apprenticeship program was and why it existed and what she expected from it. Then she talked about how it had started. She told the lobby story. Not at length, not with elaborate self-flagellation, but plainly, in the honest language of someone who'd thought about how to tell a true thing without making it about themselves, even though they were in it. I made an assumption about someone based on what he looked like, she said. I was wrong. And what happened in the days that followed, the inspection, the contract, this program, happened because the person I'd dismissed was more capable and more principled than I'd assumed, and because he didn't let what I'd done determine what he did. The room was quiet. I'm telling you this, she said, because the program we're starting today is about exactly that. About not deciding who someone is before you've seen what they can do. About giving people the access and the opportunity that their potential deserves. She looked at the apprentices. That starts with all of you. It starts today. She sat down. Hawthorne spoke for 5 minutes. Concise, specific, the way he did everything. He talked about field conditions and real-world performance and what it meant when a system failed, not in a controlled environment, but in a situation where failure had consequences. He talked about Walker's work in terms that were factual and without sentimentality, which made them carry more weight than praise would have. Then Ethan spoke. He hadn't prepared remarks. He'd thought about it and decided he didn't want prepared remarks. They always came out sounding like someone's idea of what you should say rather than what you actually wanted to say. He stood up and looked at the apprentices specifically. I'm going to tell you one thing, he said, and I want you to actually hear it, not just let it go past. He paused. The work is going to be harder than you think. Not impossible. Nothing we're doing here is impossible, but harder than the description. And there are going to be moments when you don't know the answer, when you make a mistake, when the thing you tried doesn't work. What you do in those moments is the whole thing. That's where this job actually lives. He looked at each of them for a second, one at a time. Say what you don't know. Fix what you break. Don't pretend. The rest we can work with. He sat back down. Deshawn in the third row was watching him with an expression Ethan couldn't entirely read. Not skepticism. Something more interior than that. The look of someone filing something away. After the event, when people were moving toward the food and the room had broken into smaller conversations, Deshawn found his way to where Ethan was standing with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm. Mr. Walker, he said. Deshawn. The kid had his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked at the floor for a second, then back up. That thing you said, about the moments when it's hard, did you mean that, like for everybody? For everybody, Ethan said. Even for you? Ethan looked at him. Especially for me. Deshawn nodded. He seemed to be working through something. Okay, he said. Okay, yeah, that's... He stopped. Okay. He went back toward the food table. Marcus appeared at Ethan's shoulder. What did he ask you? Whether it was hard for everyone. What'd you say? Yes. Marcus looked at Deshawn across the room, filling a plate with the careful selections of a young man eating free food with dignity. That kid, he said. Yeah, Ethan said. He's going to be something. I know, Ethan said. Don't tell him yet. Let him find it himself. Marcus looked at him. Is that what you did? Ethan drank his lukewarm coffee. More or less. Did it work? Ethan looked around the room. The apprentices, the engineers, Marcus beside him, Victoria across the room in a conversation with Hawthorne that had the quality of two people who were saying something they both meant. The bay waiting outside. The truck in the lot. The legal pad on the kitchen table with the day's notes. Still finding out, he said. February arrived mean and unannounced, the way it always did in Virginia. Not the gradual cold of November or the honest freeze of December, but the specific brutality of a month that had no patience for the people trying to get through it. The wind off the corridor cut sideways. The parking lots were sheeted with ice 2 mornings out of 5. The Sterling facility's heating system, which had been adequate for the previous winter, revealed itself to be inadequate for this one in the second week of the month, when one of the primary units in the rehabilitation bay went down and the temperature inside dropped to 41 degrees before Marsh got a repair crew in. Ethan worked in 41 degrees without adjusting his routine, Marcus wore 2 jackets and complained about it with the steady, low-level persistence of a man who had decided complaining was the only dignified response to unreasonable conditions. Carla didn't complain. She showed up in thermal layers and gloves with the fingertips cut off. She'd done it herself with scissors, he could tell, so she could still feel the components without losing her hands to the cold. She'd seen the setup in a YouTube video, she told him, when he asked about the gloves. She'd modified the design because the original left too much finger exposed. That's problem solving, Ethan said. It's cold, she said. Problem solving is just what happens when you're cold enough. He wrote that down on the legal pad that evening, not because he needed to remember it, but because it was the kind of thing that deserved to be written down. Deshawn had gotten consistently early by the second week of January and consistently early by February. He didn't mention it and nobody made a thing of it. He just arrived, set up his station, and was ready when the work started. Marcus had taken to giving him slightly more complex tasks at the end of each week. Not overwhelming, but the next degree up from what Deshawn had already demonstrated he could handle. And Deshawn took each new level with the careful concentration of someone who'd stopped waiting for the floor to fall out from under him. The floor was holding. He was starting to believe it. It was the believing that changed how you worked. Ethan knew this from experience. But the trouble started on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. That was the thing about real trouble. It rarely arrived with adequate announcement. It started as a procedural note in an email from the Federal Contracting Office, copied to Victoria and Ethan and Marsh, flagging an inconsistency in the documentation package for the first 10 vehicles. Ethan read the email at 6:50 in the morning, standing in his kitchen with his coffee, still in the shirt he'd slept in. The inconsistency was in the chain of custody records for the joint seal components, specifically a gap in the timestamp sequence for the third batch's temperature verification. He recognized the issue immediately. It was the same logging gap he'd identified in November, the one he'd documented with the temperature trace data from the bay controller as evidence of a recording interface error rather than a process deviation. He documented it. The documentation was in the package. Except, he pulled up the submission archive on his phone. The documentation file was there, but the temperature trace attachment wasn't. The attachment had been in the working file. It had not made it into the final submission package. He stared at the phone for a long moment. Then he put the coffee down, went upstairs, got dressed in 4 minutes, wrote a post-it note for Lily's babysitter, and called Marcus on his way to the truck. The temperature trace for batch 3, Ethan said when Marcus picked up. What about it? Is the original file still on the bay controller? A pause. He heard Marcus moving, the sound of the garage. I'm pulling it up. Yeah, it's here. You need me to send it? Send it to my email right now. Don't close the controller file, just send it. Done. What happened? It didn't make the federal submission. He started the truck. I'm going to Sterling. Ethan, it's 7 in the morning. I know what time it is. Is it bad? He pulled out of the driveway. It's fixable if I move fast. Okay, Marcus said. I'll stay by the phone. Victoria was already at the facility when Ethan arrived. He hadn't called her. He'd been driving, but the dark sedan was in the lot and the building lights were on in the administrative wing. He had the temp trace file open on his phone before he got through the main entrance. The receptionist on the early shift, a different woman from the one who'd been there in October, someone he'd gotten to know in the intervening months, looked up and said, "She's in the conference room," without him asking. He nodded and went. Victoria was at the table with her laptop open and 2 phones face up beside her. She'd been there a while. There was a coffee cup that had clearly been refilled at least once and an empty granola bar wrapper pushed to the corner of the table with the efficiency of someone who'd eaten without tasting it. She looked up when he came in. "The trace file," he said, and held up his phone. "Tell me," she said. He sat down across from her and walked through it. The original logging gap, the documentation he'd added in November, the attachment that hadn't made the final submission. He kept it factual, no hedging, no defensive framing. The attachment hadn't made it into the package. That was the thing that had happened. Victoria listened without interrupting. She had the quality, when she was really concentrating, of becoming very still. Not tense, just focused. He'd noticed it before. When he finished, she said, "Can we resubmit the documentation? I can send the trace file to the contracting office with a cover letter explaining the archival error. It's a clean explanation. The data shows exactly what the temperature record was, and the logging gap is clearly a system timestamp error, not a process deviation." He paused. "It's better if the explanation is proactive and technical, not defensive. I'll call the contracting officer at 9 when the office opens." She picked up one of the phones. "I want to be the one who makes the call." "That's the right call," he said. She looked at him. Something passed across her face, a quick private thing. "Is this going to hurt the contract?" He thought about it honestly. "If we move fast, if the explanation is clear, if the data supports what we're saying, which it does, no, it shouldn't." He paused. "But I should tell you, this is my responsibility. The documentation package came from my operation. The attachment was my file. I'll say that explicitly in whatever communication goes out." She shook her head. "We're in this together. The submission was a joint package." "Victoria, I'm not going to let you take that alone," she said. "It's not how this works." He looked at her. There was something in her voice that wasn't performance. It was the flat, practical certainty of a person stating what they believe to be true. "Okay," he said. She picked up the phone and started drafting a text to her legal team. He opened his laptop and started writing the technical cover letter. They worked in parallel in the quiet conference room. Outside the window, the February sky was low and gray, the color of concrete. A maintenance truck moved through the lot, salting the walkways. The building's heating system hummed. Marsh came in at 8:15, read the situation in about 12 seconds, and sat down at the end of the table without being asked. He pulled out his own laptop. Nobody assigned him a task. He found one and started working on it. This was, Ethan thought, what it actually looked like when an organization was functional, not smooth. Nothing about the morning was smooth, but functional. People identifying the problem, finding their role in the solution, doing the work without requiring the situation to be something other than what it was. The call to the contracting office happened at 9:03. Victoria made it from the conference room with Ethan and Marsh present. She was precise and calm in the way that Ethan had come to recognize as her specific form of composure under pressure. Not the managed performance of someone suppressing panic, but the actual steadiness of a person who decided how she was going to handle the situation before she picked up the phone. She explained the documentation gap, the archival error, the temperature trace data that had been generated and retained and was being resubmitted with a technical explanation. She answered 3 questions from the contracting officer. Direct answers, no equivocation, no over-elaboration. She offered to provide the Bay controller system logs as additional evidence if required. The call took 11 minutes. When it ended, she set the phone down, looked at the table for a moment, and then looked at Ethan. "They're reviewing the resubmission," she said. "The officer said it's likely to be accepted given the technical corroboration, but it goes through their quality assurance team first. 5 to 7 business days." "That's expected," Ethan said. She nodded. She looked tired. Not dramatically, not in a way she was performing, just the specific tiredness of someone who'd been carrying high-voltage tension since before 7 in the morning and was now managing the come-down from it. "Thank you for getting here fast," she said. "It was my file." "I know, I'm thanking you anyway." She picked up the cold coffee cup and looked at it, apparently decided it wasn't worth it, and set it back down. "Ethan, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly." "Okay." "How often do you carry things like this?" she said. "The file, the attachment, the tracking. How much of this is you personally holding together?" He wasn't sure where she was going. "It's my business. I hold together what needs holding." "That's not what I'm asking." She looked at him directly. "I'm asking how much of this operation is dependent on you specifically. Because if that documentation gap was on our end, our submission team, our archival process, that's a systemic problem. But I'm asking whether your operation has the same kind of systemic risk." He was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question. It was a question he'd been avoiding answering too directly because the answer was uncomfortable. "Some," he said. "Some, meaning how much?" "Marcus is solid. He can run the day-to-day without me. The technical training he's building will eventually create redundancy in the work itself. He paused. But the documentation, the client relationships, the protocols, most of that is still me. She nodded. Not with judgment, with the practical recognition of someone assessing a real situation. What would it take to change that, she said. Time. Probably one more person with the right technical and administrative range. He looked at the table. And me letting go of things I've been holding because it felt safer to hold them. She was quiet. That's not easy, she said. No, he said. It's not. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite sympathy, but lived near it, the recognition of someone who'd been through her own version of the same problem. I ran this company by myself for 18 months after my father died, she said. Not delegating, not trusting the structure. Just holding it. Everything. She picked at the edge of the coffee cup. I was completely sure that if I stopped holding it, it would fall apart. Did it? No, but I almost did. She paused. Jeffrey saved me, basically. He came in and took half the operations load and refused to give it back. I argued with him for 6 weeks, and then I ran out of energy to argue and just let him do it. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He's been doing it ever since. Marsh doesn't seem like someone you could argue with for 6 weeks, Ethan said. He isn't, she said. That's why it only took 6 weeks. It was the first time she'd said something to him that was genuinely funny. Not sharp, not pointed, just a dry acknowledgement of an absurd truth. He felt the corner of his mouth move. The person you need, she said, and her voice shifted back to practical. For the documentation and the protocols. Would you be open to us helping with that? Not taking over the function, but supporting the capacity build. He looked at her. What does that mean practically? It means we have a contracts administrator on staff who has time in the first quarter. She's good. I could offer her time to your operation to help build out the documentation system. Make it less dependent on you holding it all in your head. She paused. No cost to you. We benefit from a more robust subcontractor operation. He thought about it. He thought about the part of himself that wanted to say he could handle it himself, because that was the reflex that had gotten him through a divorce and a discharge and starting a business from nothing and raising a child on his own. Handle it yourself. Hold the line. The reflex had kept him upright. It had also, he could see now with some clarity, kept certain things from growing that needed space to grow. Okay, he said. She blinked. That was faster than I expected. Did you want me to argue about it? No, she said. I thought you'd push back more. I push back when something's wrong, he said. This isn't wrong. It's practical. He looked at the table. And I'm trying to get better at knowing the difference. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Me too. And it was simple enough that it was clearly true. The resubmission cleared federal review in 6 business days. The contracting officer sent a brief confirmation email, noted the technical explanation was satisfactory, and the temperature trace data was consistent with claimed process performance, and confirmed the contract status as active without qualification. Victoria forwarded the email to Ethan with a single line. Good. He forwarded it to Marcus with a single line. We're good. Marcus's response was a thumbs up emoji followed by, already told Carla. She said obviously. Ethan looked at that for a moment. Then he put his phone away and went back to the brake assembly he'd been working on. The contracts administrator Victoria had mentioned was a woman named Renata Johansson who arrived at Walker Automotive on a gray Wednesday with a briefcase full of process documentation templates, and the specific energy of someone who'd spent 15 years making chaotic systems legible and had strong feelings about file naming conventions. She was small, precise, and wasted no words. She walked through Ethan's existing documentation process in the first hour, asking questions in the flat tone of a doctor doing an intake exam. Not judgmental, just accurate. This spreadsheet, she said, pointing at his screen, is doing the job of what should be 3 separate systems. It's worked, Ethan said. For one person, she said. With your specific brain. If you got hit by a truck tomorrow, could Marcus reconstruct this? He thought about it honestly. Probably 60% of it. What happens to the other 40%? It would be a problem. She looked at the spreadsheet. Yes, she said. It would. She opened one of her templates. Can I show you something? He looked at the template. It was clean, logical, the kind of structure that would take time to set up and would make everything faster once it was running. How long to implement this, he said. For your current volume? 3 weeks if we do it right. 2 if we cut corners I won't let us cut. 3 weeks, he said. Good answer. She started typing. I'll need Marcus's input on the Bay Records section. Can he give me an hour Thursday? He can give you whatever you need, Ethan said. He's thorough. She looked at him over the laptop. I've heard that about him. From who? From Ms. Sterling. She went back to typing. She speaks highly of the whole operation, which, in my experience, means she's either generous or accurate. She's accurate, Ethan said. Renata nodded. Good. That's easier to work with. She came 4 Wednesdays in a row. By the end of the 4th session, the documentation system looked like something Marcus could run, that Carla could eventually run, that didn't require Ethan's specific memory to remain functional. It wasn't exciting, it was profoundly useful. On the last Wednesday, walking out to her car, Renata said, You built something solid here. It needed better systems, Ethan said. It needed better systems, she agreed, and still had something solid underneath. Those aren't the same thing. She put her briefcase in the back seat. A lot of operations I walk into. There's good systems and nothing behind them, or there's something real and no structure at all. You had the second problem. It's the better one to have. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he said, Thank you for the work. Thank Ms. Sterling, she said. She's the one who thought you needed it and that you'd actually use it. She drove away. He stood in the lot for a moment with the cold on his face, thinking about what Renata had said, about what Victoria had done, identifying the gap, finding the solution, offering it in a way that didn't make it charity or condescension, just a practical thing that needed doing, offered by someone with the means to help, and the sense to offer it in the right way. He went back inside. March came in with a week of actual warmth that felt unearned, then corrected itself with 10 days of cold that felt vindictive. The rehabilitation work was moving at pace. 7 vehicles completed through the full protocol, full documentation, 0 federal flags since February's scare. The 8th vehicle was on the lift. Deshawn had started doing first-pass quality checks without being asked. Not because anyone had assigned him the role, he'd just started doing it, quietly, in the last 20 minutes of each day before sign-out, running his eyes over the completed work, checking seals, verifications, documentation attachments. Ethan noticed it on a Tuesday and didn't say anything for 3 days. On Friday, he stopped next to Deshawn at the end of the check. You're adding this to your day? Deshawn looked up. Yeah. Why? Deshawn thought about it for a second, not performing the thought, actually doing it. Because if I were the one using these vehicles, I'd want someone to have checked it one more time. He shrugged. So I do it. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Is that a problem? No, Ethan said. The opposite. He picked up his own checklist. I'm going to start building it into the formal protocol. End-of-day verification round. Your name goes on the form as the verifying technician. Deshawn blinked. My name. Your name, Ethan said, because it's your work. You own it. Deshawn looked at the form in Ethan's hand. He didn't say anything for a moment. Okay, he said finally. His voice was careful in the way voices got when something landed somewhere real. Okay, yeah. Marcus, from across the bay, had been watching without appearing to watch. When Deshawn went to his station to gather his things, Marcus came and stood next to Ethan. You told him, Marcus said. I showed him, Ethan said. That's different. Marcus looked at Deshawn's back. Is it? When someone tells you that you're capable, Ethan said, you have to decide whether to believe them. When someone puts your name on the form and hands it to you, you already believe it. They just made it real. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the bay, the lift, the 8th vehicle in partial disassembly on the rack, the overhead lights, the tool wall, the documentation board that Renata had helped them build. You know what this place is? Marcus said. A garage. That's not what I mean. Ethan looked at him. "This is the place where nobody's already decided what you are," Marcus said. "That's what you built. Maybe you didn't do it on purpose. Maybe it's just how you operate, but that's what it is." Ethan didn't answer that. Not because he disagreed, but because it was the kind of thing he didn't know what to do with when someone said it directly. He went back to the checklist. The first genuinely hard conversation of the spring happened on a Friday afternoon when Ethan was at the Sterling facility reviewing the 9th vehicle's completion documentation, and Victoria came into the bay with her jacket still on, which meant she'd come straight from somewhere. He looked at her face and knew before she said anything that it wasn't good news. "The board," she said. "Quarterly review." "Sit down," he said. She sat on the edge of the equipment bench. He stayed standing, which felt more honest given what he could already see in her face. "They want to restructure the apprenticeship program," she said. "Not eliminate it, restructure. Which means, in board language, reduce the cost per participant and expand the cycle time and shift the wage model to stipend rather than full compensation." He was quiet. "What's the difference between stipend and full compensation in numbers?" he said. She told him. He did the math in his head. "That's a 40% reduction in what the apprentices take home," he said. "Yes. Carla supports her mother," he said. "Deshaun has a younger brother he's helping with." He kept his voice level. "These aren't people who can absorb a 40% wage cut and continue the program." "I know," she said. "So what's your position?" She looked at the floor. "I fought it. I presented the program metrics, retention rates, skill development benchmarks, the federal contract relationship." The board acknowledged the metrics. A pause. "They said the current cost structure isn't scalable as the program grows." And I have 2 weeks before the restructure goes to vote." She looked up. "I don't think I have the votes." Ethan looked at her. He was reading her face the way he read everything, methodically, looking for what was real beneath what was presented. She was frustrated. She was tired. But she was not defeated, which was different and important. "What would change the votes?" he said. "External evidence. Documented outcomes from comparable programs showing that full wage models produce measurably better outcomes than stipend models. The kind of data that makes the cost look like investment rather than expense." She paused. "And a co-author on the case. Someone whose credibility the board can't easily dismiss." "You want me to build the case with you," he said. "I want you to build it with me," she said. "Yes. If you're willing." He thought about Deshaun's end-of-day checks, Carla's cut fingertip gloves, the specific look on Marcus's face in the truck when Ethan had told him about the 8 apprentice spots. "I'm willing," he said. She exhaled, a small thing, barely audible, but real. 2 weeks isn't a lot of time," she said. "Then we start tonight," he said. She looked at him. "Tonight. Do you have somewhere to be?" "No," she said. "I don't." "Then let's work," he said. They worked until 8:30 that evening in the conference room, across the table from each other with laptops open and a shared document building between them. The case they built was specific and data-grounded and refused to be sentimental about itself. It presented the numbers, the comparable programs, the projected long-term returns, the risk model for what happened when you built a program on a financial structure that required your participants to have outside income just to survive it. At 7:40, Victoria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and put it face down. "You can take that," Ethan said. "It's not urgent." He looked at her. "You've put your phone face down 3 times in the last hour." She looked at the phone. "My sister," she said. We have a standing call on Fridays. I've been canceling it for the past month." She picked up the phone, looked at it, set it back down. "I'll call her this weekend." "Call her now," he said. "Ethan, we're working." "I know. Take 10 minutes." He looked back at his screen. "The section I'm building is going to take 20. You can call your sister and come back and it won't matter." She looked at him with the expression of someone who'd been given permission for something they hadn't realized they'd needed permission for. She took the phone and went out to the hallway. He heard, through the door, the sound of her voice change when the call connected. Warmer, less managed, the voice of someone talking to a person who'd known her before she was a CEO. He kept working. She came back 11 minutes later. Her face looked different, easier somehow, the specific ease of someone who'd been reminded that they existed outside their job. "Better?" he said. "Yes," she said. She sat down and looked at the screen. "What did you finish?" Section 3. Comparative Wage Models. He turned the laptop so she could see. "Read it and tell me where it's soft." She read it. She found 2 places where it was soft. They tightened them. They kept working. At 8:30, Ethan looked at the time and thought about Lily. She was at his mother's for the night, a standing Friday sleepover that had become a ritual both Lily and her grandmother had opinions about maintaining. She was fine. "I need to call my daughter," he said. 5 minutes. Victoria looked up. "Of course," he called from the hallway. Lily answered on the second ring. She'd been allowed to use Grandma's phone since she was 6 and treated the privilege with the gravity it deserved. "Dad," she said. It was both a greeting and a mild complaint. She'd expected him to call at 8, and it was 8:32. "Hey, Bug, sorry I'm late. Grandma made cookies." "What kind?" "The ones with the chocolate chips." A pause. "I saved you 3, but Grandma's dog ate one, so now it's 2. "That's okay." "I told the dog it wasn't okay." "Good. Dad, are you working?" "A little bit. I'll be done soon." "Okay." Another pause. "Are you going to sleep there or come home?" "Come home," he said. "Late, though. Don't wait up." "I'm at Grandma's," she said, with the tone of someone pointing out a logical irrelevancy. "I'm not going to wait up at Grandma's." "Right," he said. "I love you." "Love you," she said. "Bye." She hung up with the decisive efficiency of a 7-year-old who'd gotten the information she needed and had cookies to return to. He stood in the hallway for a second with a small smile he hadn't planned. Then he went back in. Victoria was still working, eyes on the screen, pencil moving in the margins of a printed page she'd been annotating. She looked up when he sat down. "Everything okay?" she said. "Dog ate one of her cookies," he said. Something crossed her face, the reflex of someone who found something genuinely funny and was deciding whether the moment was appropriate for it. She decided it was. She laughed. A real one, brief and unmanaged. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh like that, without architecture behind it. He picked up his laptop. "Where were we?" he said. "Section 4, she said, still with the residue of the laugh in her voice. "Outcome metrics." "Right," he said. "Outcome metrics." They worked until the document was done. The board presentation was scheduled for a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, which gave Ethan and Victoria 10 days from that Friday night in the conference room to sharpen the document into something that could survive a room full of people who'd already decided what they thought. Ethan knew that kind of room. He'd presented in front of review panels, inspection committees, contracting officers who'd come in with a conclusion and were looking for confirmation. The document wasn't going to be enough by itself. Documents were never enough by themselves. What mattered was the person in the room holding the document, whether they believed what they were presenting and whether that belief was visible in a way that cost them something. Victoria believed it. He was certain of that. The question was whether she'd let the board see the cost. They met 3 more times in the 10 days, twice at Sterling in the evenings, once on a Saturday morning at a diner near the garage because both of them had things they needed to be doing afterward, and the midpoint was practical. Ethan ordered eggs. Victoria ordered coffee and a piece of toast she ate half of and left, which he'd noticed was her pattern when she was preoccupied. The Saturday session was the most useful. Away from the Sterling facility, away from the specific pressures of the building and the role it represented, she talked more directly about the board, the individuals, their concerns, what each of them actually cared about beneath the language they used in meetings. She was precise about it, without being unkind. "Reeves is the swing vote," she said. "He's not opposed to the program on principle. He's opposed to what he sees as open-ended financial commitment." She moved her coffee cup slightly, the way she did when she was organizing her thoughts. "If we can show him a bounded investment with a defined return window, he'll move." "What's his return window preference?" He said 3 years in 2 different contexts. 3 years is workable, Ethan said. The skills certification data from the comparable programs shows placement rates that justify the wage model within 24 to 30 months. We can frame the Reeves case around that specific window. She looked at him. You've been thinking about this since Tuesday. I've been thinking about it since the Friday you told me. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the diner window, the Saturday morning street was doing what Saturday morning streets did. Slower than weekdays, people with coffee cups, a dog being walked by someone who'd rather still be asleep. Can I ask you something? She said. You're going to anyway, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. Why does this matter to you? The apprenticeship, the wage model specifically. She looked at him directly. You got what you negotiated. 4 spots became 8. That was already more than the original ask. You could have left the board restructure to me. He looked at his eggs. He took a bite. He thought about how to say what was true without making it into a speech. Marcus came through a program, he said. Workforce reentry. The program placed him in my shop and gave him 6 weeks of coverage. The cost of him being there while he proved himself. 6 weeks. He set the fork down. After 6 weeks, he was on his own wage. And it was enough, but barely. There were months that first year where I know he was making choices about what bills to pay and which ones to defer, because I've been in that position and I know what the math looks like on a person's face. He looked at her. He stayed because the work was worth staying for. But I've thought, since then, about how many people don't stay. Not because the work isn't worth it, because the financial structure makes it impossible to stay long enough to find out. She was listening the way she listened when something was landing somewhere real, completely still, not preparing her response, just taking it in. Deshawn's brother is 14, Ethan said. Carla's mother has a part-time disability and can't work full hours. These aren't abstractions. If we cut their wages by 40%, Deshawn picks up a night shift somewhere and stops being able to be present in the program. Carla starts looking for something that pays more. We lose them. And they were right here. They were doing the work. They were getting good at it. And we lose them because a board wanted to improve a line item. He picked up his fork again. That's why it matters, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay meaning you already knew that? Okay meaning I needed to hear you say it, because I'm going to have to say a version of it on Thursday, and I wanted to know if it held up when it was said out loud. He looked at her. Does it? Yes, she said. It holds. Thursday arrived overcast and cold in the particular way of mid-March in Virginia, when spring had been technically announced but hadn't shown up yet. Ethan was not in the boardroom. He had not been invited to the boardroom. The board presentation was Victoria's domain, and she hadn't suggested he attend, and he hadn't offered. That wasn't cowardice, it was clarity. The argument was better made by the person whose name was on the building. His job had been to help build it. He spent Thursday morning at the garage working a fleet van service that had been scheduled for 2 weeks. Marcus came in at 8, and they worked in the companionable parallel silence that 3 years of shared workspace had built between them. The radio was on. The country station, low. Outside, it had started to rain, which was better than ice, but not by much. At 11:40, Marcus said, "You're thinking about the board thing." "I'm thinking about the brake caliper," Ethan said. "You've been looking at the same brake caliper for 4 minutes." Ethan put the caliper down. "The meeting's at 2. "I know." Marcus was calibrating the torque on a wheel assembly, not looking at him. "You think she's got it?" "I think she built a good case." "That's not what I asked." Ethan was quiet. He looked at the rain on the bay door, the gray curtain of it, the sound against the metal roof. "I don't know," he said. "Boards are rooms with their own logic. Sometimes the best argument doesn't win." Marcus nodded. He kept working. After a moment, "What happens if it doesn't?" "Then we figure out what's possible from the outside," Ethan said. "There are other funding mechanisms. Industry grants, workforce development funds, county programs. It's slower and it's less than full wages, but it's not nothing. Would you still do it, the program, at reduced scale?" "Yes," Ethan said, without hesitation. Marcus looked up then. He looked at Ethan for a moment with the expression he had sometimes, the one that meant he was seeing something he didn't entirely have words for. "You know what the difference is between you and most people?" Marcus said. Please don't. The difference is, Marcus. You do the work before you know how it turns out, Marcus said. Most people wait to see if it's worth it. You don't wait. Ethan picked up the brake caliper. He examined it with the focused attention of a man looking at a brake caliper. Get back to work, he said. Marcus got back to work, but he was almost smiling when he did it. That's it. Victoria called at 4:17. Ethan was still at the garage, cleaning up the last of the van job when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He picked it up and looked at the screen for half a second before answering. Tell me, he said. A pause. Short. 2 seconds at most. But in those 2 seconds he understood something about the nature of pauses, about how the specific length of a silence before news arrived could carry the news itself. We held the wage model, she said. He stopped moving. Full wages, she said. 12-month cycle. The expansion to 16 spots in the second program year stays on the table pending the first-year outcome metrics. Her voice had that quality again. The one from the contract confirmation call, the thing that was usually held back. Reeves voted yes. What changed his mind? The 24-month placement data, and, she paused again, differently this time. Not the pause before news, the pause before something that cost her to say. I told them about the lobby, about October, about sending you to the service entrance. He didn't say anything. I told them that the program existed in part because of a mistake I'd made, she said. That I had looked at a person and seen a category instead of a human being, and that the consequences of that kind of thinking, at a company level, at a program level, were exactly what we were trying to address. She exhaled. Reeves said afterward that was the most honest thing he'd heard in a board meeting in 4 years, which is either a compliment or a criticism of board meetings generally. Both, probably, Ethan said. She made the sound that meant she was almost laughing. Both, probably. He leaned against the workbench. The rain had stopped sometime in the last hour, and the bay door was letting in the damp, cold air that came after rain, which smelled like metal and wet concrete, and the specific outdoor smell he associated, for reasons he'd never analyzed, with the feeling of work being finished. You told them about the lobby, he said. Not a question. Yes. That wasn't easy. No, she said. It wasn't. A pause. But it was true. And I've been trying to figure out, since October, how to be more honest in rooms like that about things that are true and uncomfortable. She was quiet for a moment. It turns out just saying the true thing is the method. I know that sounds obvious. It's less obvious in practice, he said. Yes, she said. Much less obvious in practice. He heard her exhale again, slower this time, the specific release of something that had been held for a long time. Ethan, she said. Yeah. Thank you. For the case, for the data. For the Saturday morning at that diner where you said the thing about Deshawn's brother that I kept thinking about for 10 days. He looked at the bay. The van on the rack, finished. The tool wall, organized. The floor Marcus had swept before he left. You made the argument, he said. I helped you build it. That's different. It doesn't feel different. It is, though, he said. You walked into that room. You told them the lobby story. That was yours. A long quiet. I'm going to go tell Marcus, he said. Give him my congratulations, she said. I will. He straightened up. Good work today, Victoria. It was the first time he'd used her name without context. Not as address, not as clarification, just her name on its own. He noticed it when it was out. She noticed it too, he thought, from the quality of the pause that followed. Good work, she said. He hung up and called Marcus, who picked up on the first ring and said, Well? Before Ethan could speak. Full wages, Ethan said. Program holds. Marcus's response was a sound, not a word, just a sound, the kind that came up from somewhere below speech. Then, Deshawn's going to want to hear this. Call him, Ethan said. And Carla. Already pulling up the number, Marcus said. Ethan listened to the sound of Marcus dialing. Then he hung up and stood in the empty bay with the April cold coming in around the door, and the overhead light making its particular yellow rectangle on the concrete floor. He thought about what Marcus had said that morning. You do the work before you know how it turns out. He didn't think of it as virtue. It was more practical than that. He'd learned in the years since everything had come apart and been rebuilt that waiting to see how things turned out before you committed to them was its own kind of choice, and not a neutral one. Waiting cost things. The program would have been smaller. Deshawn would have been in a stipend structure. The case might not have been made the way it needed to be made. You did the work. Then you found out how it turned out. Sometimes it turned out. Sometimes it didn't. Today it had. The first-year cohort completed their certification cycle in September. 8 of the 8 finished. That wasn't a given. Ethan had known it wasn't a given, had thought about it with the honesty of a man who didn't comfort himself with best-case scenarios. Programs lost people. Life interrupted. Things came up that training schedules didn't accommodate. All 8 finished. The certification event was held at the Sterling facility in the same cafeteria where the January announcement had been. It was Victoria's idea to hold it there. Ethan thought it was the right idea. Hawthorne came again. He'd driven 4 hours to be there, which nobody had asked him to do, and which he'd informed them of 3 days before arrival as a simple fact rather than a gesture. The 8 apprentices received their certifications from a Regional Workforce Development Board official, a formal document, an actual credential, the kind that showed up in a background check and meant something to a hiring manager who didn't already know them. Deshawn received his and held it in both hands for a moment before he put it down. Ethan was watching from the side of the room and he saw the moment clearly. The specific way Deshawn looked at it, not triumphant, just quiet. The look of someone for whom the thing in front of them was real in a way that required a second to absorb. Carla received hers, shook the official's hand with the crisp confidence of someone who had known for 6 months that she was going to finish, and sat back down and immediately took a photo of the document on her phone, which she was almost certainly sending to her mother. After the formal part, when people were moving around the room with food and the event had relaxed into itself, Ethan found Deshawn near the window. You staying? Ethan said. Deshawn looked at him. With the program. The second cycle's starting in January. We need a senior technician to work alongside the new cohort, someone who knows the protocols from the inside. He paused. The wage goes up, and there's a lead designation. Same as Marcus's role, different scope. Deshawn was quiet for a moment. He was looking at the room, the people in it, the space, the Sterling logo on the far wall. When I started, he said, I thought this was going to be like the other things. What other things? Programs. Things that were supposed to help. Where you go through it, and then at the end it's basically the same as before. He looked at Ethan. This wasn't like that. No, Ethan said. Why not? Ethan thought about it. Because we treated it like the work mattered, which it does. So if you do it right, the work proves itself. Deshawn looked at the certification document he was still holding. My brother wants to apply, he said, for the next cycle. Ethan looked at him. How old is he now? 15. He'd need to wait a year for eligibility. Tell him to wait a year, Ethan said. And tell him to come see me before he applies. We can talk about what to expect. Deshawn looked at him. You'd do that? It's a conversation, Ethan said. Yeah. Deshawn nodded slowly. He looked back at the room. Okay, he said. I'll stay. Good, Ethan said, and went to get coffee. Marcus took him out for a beer that evening. Not a bar, neither of them were particularly bar people, but a booth in the back of a diner that had good pie and a television in the corner showing a game nobody at the table was watching. They sat across from each other with the ease of people who'd been in each other's company long enough that the silences were as functional as the conversation. Carla's leaving, Marcus said. I know. You're okay with it? She got a position at a fleet operations company in Richmond. Better scale, better trajectory. Ethan wrapped his hands around his coffee. That's the point, isn't it? They leave. They take it somewhere. She might not have gotten the position without the certification. Almost certainly wouldn't have, Ethan agreed. Marcus looked at his pie. I keep thinking about where I'd be, he said, If you hadn't taken the program placement. Don't do that, Ethan said. I know, but I think about it. You'd have found something, Ethan said. Maybe. Marcus looked up. But it wouldn't have been this. Ethan looked at him. Marcus had changed in 3 years in ways that were difficult to articulate cleanly because the changes had happened incrementally, the way real changes usually did. He was still the same person. Same humor, same baseline stubbornness, same instinct to check his work twice. But the thing that had been underneath the careful performance of the first year, the waiting for the floor to fall, was gone. Had been gone for a while, replaced by something more settled. Not complacent, just solid. No, Ethan said. It wouldn't have been this. Marcus picked up his fork. You gonna tell me where you and Victoria Sterling are at? Ethan looked at him. I'm asking, Marcus said without looking up from the pie. She's a colleague, Ethan said, a partner on the program. Uh-huh. Marcus. I'm just observing, Marcus said, that the way you two have conversations is not exactly how you talk to, say, Marsh. Marsh and I have a fine working relationship. Sure you do. Marcus took a bite of pie. I'm not saying anything. I'm observing. You're saying something while claiming you're observing. That's a different thing than just saying something, Marcus said, and he was almost smiling. Ethan drank his coffee. He looked at the television in the corner. The game was close, whatever game it was. He thought about the diner in October, the Saturday morning with the toast she'd half eaten, the conference room on a Friday night with her voice changing in the hallway when she called her sister, the board meeting when she'd walked in and told them the lobby story and held the line on the wages. He thought about how she'd started calling him Ethan, how he'd started calling her Victoria, how there was a conversation that was forming in the space between those two names that neither of them had made explicit yet, because neither of them were people who said things before they knew what they meant. I don't know what it is yet, he said. Marcus nodded. Okay. That's a real answer, not an avoidance. I know it is, Marcus said. I wasn't pushing. He took another bite. You seem different. Since October. Not different bad. Just different. Ethan thought about it. Things are different. Yeah. Marcus looked at his plate. Good different? Ethan considered the question the way it deserved to be considered, not with the reflex response, not with the defensive reframe, but actually sitting inside it for a moment. The water stain on the ceiling was fixed now, properly this time, sanded and retextured and painted in the right color. He'd done it on a Sunday in February when Lily was at his mother's, and he'd had 4 uninterrupted hours and no excuse. He'd stood on the step stool and done the work and come down and looked at it, and it was right. Smooth. Invisible. Like it had never been there. The Peterson fleet contract had expanded to 7 vehicles after Renata helped him build the documentation system that made bidding larger contracts less terrifying. Walker Automotive had a second full-time employee, a woman named Jamie who'd come through a referral from Phil, the dock foreman at Sterling, and had a background in diagnostic systems that filled exactly the gap Ethan had identified when Renata asked him what he'd need to make the operation less dependent on him alone. Lily was 7 now. She'd started reading chapter books, real ones, thick ones, and read them with the focused solemnity of a person doing important work. She'd also, in the last 2 months, started asking questions about cars, not with the abstract curiosity of a kid who thought her dad's job was interesting, but specific questions, the kind that suggested she'd been paying attention to more than he'd realized. He'd started answering the questions seriously. He didn't know where that went. He didn't need to know yet. He just answered the questions. Good different, he said. Marcus nodded. He didn't make more of it. He ate his pie. The television showed the game. The diner did what diners did in the evening, with the low murmur of people at other tables, and the sound of the kitchen, and the particular warm light that made the world outside the window look darker than it was. On a Friday in early October, almost exactly a year after the delivery, almost exactly a year after the lobby, Ethan was at his desk in the back office at the garage when his phone showed a message from Victoria. Are you at the facility? I'm driving past. I have something I want to show you. He typed back, I'm here. She pulled up 12 minutes later. She came through the bay door the way she did now, without ceremony, knowing the layout, stepping around the lift with the ease of someone who'd been in the space enough times that it was familiar. She was holding a sheet of paper. She handed it to him. It was an official letter from the Regional Workforce Development Board addressed to Sterling Defense Solutions and Walker Automotive Restoration jointly. The letter announced a citation, a formal recognition for the apprenticeship program, designated as a model program for the region, with an invitation to present the program structure at the annual Workforce Development Symposium in the spring. He read it twice. He handed it back to her. "They want us to present it," she said. "The program, how it was built, what the wage model looks like, the outcomes from the first cohort." "I'm not a speaker," he said. "You're better than you think you are," she said. "I've watched you talk to 18-year-olds who needed to hear something true, and I've watched the rooms get quiet when you do it. That's not nothing." He looked at the letter in her hand. "I'll think about it." "That's more than no," she said. "It's not yes yet," he said. "I'll take it." She folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. She looked around the bay, Jamie working at the far end, a vehicle on the lift, the tool wall, the documentation board with its current jobs listed in Marcus's handwriting because Marcus had taken over the board when Renata built the system and had very specific opinions about how it should be organized. "Same time last year," Victoria said. "October." "Yeah," he said. "You were standing outside my building with a documentation folder and a truck." "I was inside your building," he said, "for about 2 minutes, then you sent me around back." She looked at him. "I did. And then a general walked past your whole executive team to come find me in the parking lot. And I stood in my lobby and watched that happen," she said, and felt like the floor had moved. He looked at her. There was something in her face that was different from the face she'd walked into his garage with a year ago. Not softer, exactly. Just more visible. Like something that had been held carefully behind a professional surface for a long time had gradually found its way to the front, where it could be seen. "Do you regret it?" she said. "Coming back in, the consulting, all of it." He thought about Deshawn's certification document. Marcus in the truck cab saying it wouldn't have been this. Carla in Richmond. The 8 new apprentice applications on his desk for January. The documentation system that made the operation real in a way it hadn't been before. He thought about his daughter asking him, last Saturday, how a brake caliper worked, and sitting on the garage floor with her for 40 minutes explaining it with the actual parts in front of them, and the specific quality of her attention, the way she turned the caliper in her hands and asked the exact right question at the exact right moment. "No," he said, "I don't regret it." She nodded. She wasn't smiling. Victoria Sterling didn't smile easily, which made it mean something when she did, but her face had the quality of something that had resolved, attention going quiet. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay. Not about the program, not about the contract." She looked at him directly, the way she looked at things she was being honest about. "I've been thinking for a while now about what this is, between us." He looked at her. "I don't mean the business relationship," she said. "I know what that is. I mean the other thing. The diner on Saturdays, the Friday nights in the conference room, the phone calls that start about the program and end up being about other things." She paused. "I'm not good at ambiguity," she said. "I don't do well with things that are one thing and possibly another thing at the same time without a name." He was quiet. "So I'm asking," she said, "because I think it's better to ask than to keep having a conversation around the edge of the actual question." He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the things he'd said to Marcus. "I don't know what it is yet." That had been true in September. It was less true now. "I have a 7-year-old, he said. "I know you have a 7-year-old. "She's the first thing," he said, "in terms of priority. Always." "I understand that," she said. "I'm not asking you to change that. And I'm not—" He stopped. He started again. "I'm not easy to know. I've been told that. I hold things too long before I say them. I work too much, and I know I work too much, and I do it anyway." "I work too much," she said. "I cancel calls with my sister. I ate half a piece of toast for lunch for approximately 4 months straight." She paused. "I'm not looking for easy." He looked at her. He thought about the water stain on the ceiling that he'd fixed on a Sunday in February, about the post-it notes on the dashboard, about the way some things you put off because they feel too significant to get wrong, and how putting them off doesn't make them smaller. It just makes the moment when you finally address them feel more real. Then yeah, he said, the other thing is real. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had asked a question they were genuinely uncertain about and had received an answer they had not allowed themselves to assume. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They stood in the bay with the October cold coming in at the edges of the door and the overhead light making its yellow rectangle on the floor and the documentation board with Marcus's handwriting on it and the vehicle on the lift and all the ordinary material of a working day around them. It wasn't a movie moment. Nobody was going to score it. It was two people in a garage in October acknowledging something true. That was all. It was enough. That evening, Ethan picked Lily up from school at the regular time, drove home the regular way, made dinner while she sat at the table with a chapter book propped against the napkin holder. She was 7 pages from the end. She was not going to stop at 7 pages from the end. He cooked. She read. The kitchen had its ordinary sounds. The pan, the refrigerator hum, the low noise of the neighborhood outside. When the food was on the table, she put the book face down, very carefully, because she was a person who did not break spines, and looked at the plate. What is this? She said. Pasta and vegetables. What vegetables? Zucchini and peppers. She examined the plate with the scrutiny of a safety inspector. I don't like zucchini. You ate it last week. I ate it because I was hungry. Then be hungry, he said. She picked up her fork with the expression of someone accepting an unjust situation with grace. She ate the pasta. She ate the peppers. She moved the zucchini to one side and ate around it, which he allowed because the hill of zucchini was small and the battle wasn't worth the evening. Halfway through the meal, she said, Dad. Yeah. Are you happy? He looked at her. She was looking at her plate, moving a piece of pepper around with her fork, with the casual attention of someone asking a question they'd been holding for a while. He thought about the year. October to October, the delivery and the lobby and the general in the parking lot. Marcus on the steps of the Sterling facility the first day of the subcontract, standing slightly too straight, the posture of someone who still wasn't sure the floor would hold. Deshawn's certification document held in both hands. Carla in Richmond with a job she'd earned. 16 new applications for January. Victoria in the garage an hour ago, asking the actual question instead of the question around it. The legal pads. The post-it notes. The ceiling, fixed. He thought about Lily, age 3, in the temporary apartment in Fredericksburg, sleeping with both hands tucked under her cheek while her father sat at a table trying to figure out what came next. He hadn't known then. He'd just kept going. He'd kept showing up, kept doing the work, kept choosing, imperfectly, tiredly, without a clear map, to build something rather than stop. This was what it had built. Not perfectly, not without cost. Not in any way that looked the way he'd imagined when he was younger and imagined things more precisely, but real, functional. His. Yeah, he said. I am. She looked up at him. She was his daughter. His eyes, her mother's coloring, some third thing that was entirely her own. She assessed the answer the way she assessed most answers, seriously, without sentimentality, deciding whether it was the truth. She decided it was. Good, she said, and went back to her pasta. He watched her eat. She was humming again. That song with no melody. The one that wasn't a song, just a sound she made when she was comfortable. He listened to it for a moment. Then he picked up his fork and ate his dinner. Some things you figure out in a day. Most things take longer. The ones that matter, the ones that actually change the shape of your life, tend to arrive sideways, dressed as something ordinary. A delivery, a parking lot, a man in a work jacket who didn't argue when he was sent around back. What you do with that moment is the whole question, whether you see it for what it is or you see what you expected to see and move on. Victoria Sterling learned to stop moving long enough to look. Ethan Walker had been stopped his whole life. Stopped in the sense of being rooted, being present, doing the work in front of him with the full weight of his attention, regardless of who was watching or what they thought they saw. Neither of them was finished. Neither of them had it figured out. The documentation system would need updating. The board would push back again on something, probably next quarter. Lily would be 8 in 3 months, and 8 was its own territory, uncharted. Marcus would do something that surprised him. Deshaun's brother would apply and be nervous and need someone to tell him what to expect. There would be more mornings, more legal pads, more coffee going cold while the work went on. That was fine. That was the thing, actually. Not the contract, not the citation, not the board vote or the general's commendation or the moment in the garage when 2 people finally said the real thing. The thing was the morning, showing up to it, doing the work before you knew how it would turn out. Ethan Walker had always known that. He just needed the year to remind him that knowing it alone wasn't enough. That at some point you had to let it be visible. Let it cost something. Let other people in far enough to be changed by what you'd built. The water stain was gone. The ceiling was clean. He'd fixed it himself on a Sunday when nobody was watching. That was enough.